What if your fate was predetermined? What if your choice determined the life or death of the entire world? What if you could go back in time and try and change the past? Legacy of Kain explores all of these things and more in its epic story of deception, destiny, revenge, redemption, and betrayal. Its Shakespearean dialogue, biblical themes, and grand scope make it a series that fans love going back to. Legacy of Kain is a long-beloved series of video games starting in the early 90s. Its fanbase is massive and dedicated. The games themselves were praised by critics at the time of release, and some of the entries have gone down as classics in the annals of video game history. So where is Legacy of Kain today? Why hasn't a mainline entry been released in almost 18 years? What is it about Legacy of Kain that makes fans so eager for a sequel or even a remake? I'm going to try and answer all these questions and more today as we talk about the legendary series Legacy of Kain. I'd like to establish some structure to this video considering the length. If that kind of stuff bores you, you can just skip ahead with the handy chapters that I've included below. First, I'd like to specifically address the length of the video. It's pretty long, but there's a reason for this. Legacy of Kain, while only comprising 5 mainline entries, is heady. Its story is lore-heavy and full of metaphors that lend themselves well to analysis. It's one of the reasons people still talk about these games today. Its gameplay is worthy of heavy analysis as well because its impact on the action-adventure genre is still seen to this day and was extremely prevalent in the early 2000s. There's also a lot to cover with the history and development of the series. I'd like to give good context for each game to show the vision and reasoning behind the development of each entry in the series. The Legacy of Kain series is also infamous for cut content and cancelled sequels, which we'll be going into detail on as well. I'd also like to note that most of the footage I'll be showing I got from the PC versions of these games. These were the easiest way for me to play these games in 2021. Most of the PC versions work well when patched. I'm not going to get into the ridiculous amount of effort that went into getting these games to work on modern machines. Just know it's dumb. I mostly won't point out flaws that are specific to the PC ports, and if I do, I'll let you know. I'd also like to thank Kawaii Games for letting me use his Soul Reaver footage. For some reason, I couldn't reasonably record this game, which was one of the smaller issues I ran into when trying to get these PC ports to work. My intention for this video was to provide a final retrospective on the series, combining the history of the series with an in-depth analysis on the games themselves as well. Each section will cover the development, the gameplay and story, and then cut content, as well as any final thoughts that I have on the game before we move on to the next one. If cut content or development isn't your thing, like I said before, I've included handy chapters below so that you can just skip straight to the story and gameplay. I'd also like to thank the amazing people over at the Legacy of Kain wiki. Their information and help was so beneficial in the process of making this video. I'd also like to shout out sites like the Dark Chronicle and the Lost Worlds, the former being an encyclopedia of everything Legacy of Kain, and the latter being a fan archive of all cut content and cancelled sequels in the entire series. The Legacy of Kain fanbase is amazing and dedicated. I worked a lot on this video and I did a lot of research, but it's very possible that I missed something. If there's any questions that my video doesn't answer, you can go to any of these sites and try to find them yourselves. I put some links in the description for those curious. An obligatory spoiler warning is also in order, as I'll be going in depth on each of these games. So spoiler warning for Blood Omen, Blood Omen 2, Soul Reaver, Soul Reaver 2, and Legacy of Kain Defiance. Legacy of Kain is an amazing series, and you can see the love and care that went into each game. It's clear that the people making these games actually cared about their world and the characters in that world. So I think it's only fair that we're comprehensive when we're talking about the series itself. With that being said, it's time for me to quit talking and get to the first game. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son. And today, I want to talk about Legacy of Kain. I had to do that. Blood Omen Legacy of Kain is a top-down action-adventure game developed by Silicon Knights and published by Crystal Dynamics, with distribution by Activision. The original concept for Blood Omen was developed in 1993 by Dennis Dyack and Ken McCulloch while working at Silicon Knights. The game was originally titled The Pillars of Nosgoth. The team at Silicon Knights spent 6 to 8 months working on the game's design. They wanted to make a game where there was no ultimate weapon or armor, forcing you to use your head as well as your reflexes. They wanted it to be a mature title that adults would want to play. Dyack met Lyle Hall, a Crystal Dynamics producer, at a developer conference, and the two agreed that games should be given higher budgets and deliver on bigger expectations. Silicon Knights had sent multiple proposals to Crystal Dynamics, one of which was for Blood Omen. Crystal Dynamics eventually went with Blood Omen as they thought that fantasy would go over better than the other sci-fi game that Silicon Knights were pitching. The Soul Reaver, the titular weapon of the series, was taken from another of the proposals the team had developed and was transplanted into Blood Omen. But this is the legacy of Kain after all, and back in 1996, anti-heroes were not as popular as they are now, and barely existed in video games. Dyack said that Kain was partially modeled after William Money from Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven.
Killed just about everything that walks or crawled at one time or another. And I'm here to kill you, Little Bill.
They wanted to challenge the monomyth and introduce players to a world where everyone thinks you're evil. While Kain might not be a traditional anti-hero, leaning more towards the anti than hero, he still counts, and this moral gray area is a central piece of Kain's story, especially in the beginning. The game was originally planned for the 3DO and possibly the Sega Saturn, but Hall and Dyack convinced Crystal Dynamics to choose the PlayStation, as they were impressed with its streamlined architecture and graphical abilities. When Blood Omen was finally showcased at E3 1995, Silicon Knights were adamant that they receive credit as the game's developer. One of the few publications to give credit to Silicon Knights was Die Hard Game Fan, which named Blood Omen Best Overall Game at E3. After lots of consideration, the decision was made to substantially increase the size of the development team, doubling Silicon Knights members overnight. This led to the size of the game increasing as well, with an original planned 40 game characters turning to 190 and 40 tile sets increased to 600. When the game released, its sales were described as immensely successful, with the game being a critical hit as well. Critics cited the story as the best of many strong features in the game, and the load times being noted as agonizing. This was due to the large amount of cutscenes and lack of VRAM allocation being provided on the PlayStation, meaning the team had to store graphics where they didn't belong. After the development, there was a bit of controversy surrounding the rights to the actual series. We'll get into that a little bit, but let's talk about the story of Blood Omen. The story of Blood Omen centers around Nosgoth and our titular character, Kain. The world of Nosgoth is tied to the Pillars of Nosgoth, 9 columns of marble and other materials which reach into the sky infinitely. Each pillar is tied to a fundamental principle, with a guardian being responsible for each. Mind, represented by Noopraptor, the mentalist. Dimension, protected by Azimuth, the planer. Conflict, protected by Malik, the paladin. Nature, guarded by Bane, the druid. Balance, guarded by Ariel. Energy, guarded by Dejul, the energist. Time, guarded by Mobius, the time streamer. States, guarded by Anacroth, the alchemist. And Death, guarded by Mortanius, the necromancer. These sorcerers make up the Circle of 9, dedicated to serving and protecting the integrity of the land. When a guardian dies, the circle is broken until their successor is found. These pillars directly correlate to the state and health of the world itself. If the pillars are corrupt, the world is corrupt. Long before the events of the game, the vampire population of Nosgoth increased, which spurred the forming of the Circle of 9. This also encouraged a crusade of a monastic brotherhood of vampire hunters called the Seraphim. The subsequent purging of vampires caused Vorador, a legendary vampire, to retaliate, storming the Circle of 9 and killing 6 of its members, before defeating Malek, the leading member of the Seraphim. Mortanius, the necromancer, then condemned Malek for his trespasses upon the vampires, and damned him to serve the Circle for eternity, as a wraith trapped inside a suit of armor.
fulfilling the sacred mallet of the Sarafan, you are hereby damned.
In our current story, vampires and humans coexist. Sort of, not really. The humans are too busy to worry about vampires as there's a new threat, the legions of the Nemesis attacking from the north. Years later, Ariel, the Guardian of Balance, is murdered by an unknown assailant, causing the pillars to break and turn corrupted. That brings us up to the current day. You start the game as Kain, a young nobleman from Korhagen. He stopped at a tavern in Ziegstrel, but was turned away by the barkeep and forced to the road.
Tavern's closing. Best be on your way, stranger.
It's at this moment that Kain is set upon by a pack of brigands and run through with a sword. You can't attack or defend yourself at all at this point. You can even get away from the bandits a little bit, but the town's exit is blocked off. You're forced to watch Kain die, no matter what. Kain wakes up in the underworld, faced by the necromancer Mortanius, who gives him a chance at vengeance, promising him the blood he hungers for. Kain accepts the offer without a second thought, his narration calling the choice foolish, and awakes in his own mausoleum.
I awoke to the pain of a new existence, in a dank womb of darkness and decay.
He realizes that he's been awoken as a vampire, and sets out immediately for vengeance. You gain a sword and a recall spell, as well as some flays, which are some type of curved blade, I'm assuming. Kain kills his assailants with ease, and is told by Mortanius that these fools were merely the instruments of his murder, not the cause. Kain then sets out to the Pillars of Nosgoth to look for a cure to this curse that he's accepted. This is where the game opens up a little and lets you veer off the beaten path. It's not CRPG open, but it will let you take the road less traveled and possibly find some secret caves along the way. There's a lot of secrets in this game of a large variety. We'll get to those in depth a bit later. Kain arrives at the 9 Pillars and is met by the specter of Ariel, the former Guardian of Balance. When Kain asks how he may cure this curse that he's chosen, she tells him that there is no cure for death, only release. She then instructs him to destroy the sorcerer's poisoning Nosgoth if he sought peace. The Circle of Nine have currently been driven to insanity by Noopraptor, the Mind Guardian. Noopraptor was Ariel's lover, and in a fit of grief and misery over his beloved's death, he vowed to spread terror throughout the land. Noopraptor is stationed in his retreat high atop a mountain overlooking Wasserbund. This is our next destination. We take a teleporter away from the pillars and quickly gain bat form. Kain has many different forms that he acquires throughout the game, but bat form basically allows us to fast travel. This might be one of the earliest iterations of fast travel I've seen in a game. You can find bat beacons all around Nosgoth, and when discovered, you can fly there anytime you'd like. As we make our way through Nosgoth, we find our first shrine. Shrines are normally hidden in caves and are small dungeons that will provide you with some new power upgrade at the end. Our first shrine will provide us with a light spell. This spell illuminates the area for a short period of time, and I didn't really find much use in the spell, to be honest. Immediately we find another cave which gives us the wolf form. Wolf form lets Kain change into a wolf. Duh. And lets us jump over chasms or get up onto higher ledges. This opens up the world a lot and lets us reach areas we couldn't before. Blood Omen does have this kind of Metroidvania, and I use that term loosely, design to it. You constantly end up gaining abilities or weapons that you can use to travel back to already completed areas and find secrets there. After we get our wolf form, we get access to our first Spirit Forge. Spirit Forges are our second type of secret cave, and they allow us to trade blood for something, normally a bunch of items. In this case, we get 10 flays for most of our blood vial. These secrets are cool, but every time I did them, I would be left with almost no health, and would be sweating to get to the next save point, which I entirely understand is the point, and I think it works well. It's an optional sacrifice which indirectly ups the difficulty in return for some upgrades. Our next type of secret cave that we'll encounter are blood shrines. Blood shrines are big pools of, you guessed it, blood. We can drink from them and receive a permanent upgrade. This one makes us stronger, which really means we can move small boulders now. Our final type of secret cave is the moon caves. Moon caves are the rarest form of cave that I encountered while playing Blood Omen, the only reason being that they are only open on a full moon. I tried as hard as I could to not cheese the game very much and just have a normal playthrough, so I didn't just sit and wait for these to open. On our journey, we passed through Noctholm and Stykencrow, where nothing of particular note happens. But eventually, we reach Wasserbund. Outside of Wasserbund is a gypsy camp where we find our third form, Disguise, which is going to come in very handy in a second. Disguise lets us turn into a human, as long as we have magic. This is particularly handy because Wasserbund is full of pretty strong guards. As we reach the middle of the town, we see Nopraptor's retreat. It's looming over the city in the shape of a giant skull. The Mentalist sits atop his retreat, watching all, waiting for his moment to wreak havoc upon the world. As we enter his retreat, the front door sitting at the foot of the mountain, we begin our first boss dungeon. Most bosses in the game are preceded by a large dungeon full of monsters, puzzles, and traps. This is an old-school design philosophy that shows its face more than ever in this setting, but still works for the most part. As we invade his retreat, there's probably no better time than now to talk about Nopraptor. Nopraptor is a mentalist. The game doesn't really explain what it means, but we do know that he had power over mental and psychic abilities, while also being hypersensitive to people's emotions. This could be why his grief was so overwhelming that he would go into a fit of fury and rage at the news of his beloved's death. Nopraptor's pillar token, which is what a guardian receives when they become protector of a pillar, was his enlarged cranium, assumingly making him smarter and more powerful in the ways of the mind. I see Nopraptor's story as almost a mirror of Kain's, a different onset but the same outcome. Nopraptor seeks revenge and murder, but because of his grief over his dead lover. Kain's fury and revenge are much more inward. He seeks these things for himself. Nopraptor's retreat is one of the shorter boss dungeons. We bob and weave through bone projectiles and fireballs, killing slimes, sorcerers, and skeletons along our way. Eventually, we reach the top of the retreat, and Kain sees Nosgoth through the eyes of Nopraptor. That's when Kain comes face to face with the man himself, who already has Malek the Paladin with him. He dismisses Malek and we're left to fight Nopraptor. The Nopraptor fight was particularly easy. He shoots waves of green and purple balls at you, but the purple ones fade in and out. You can use this moment to slip past the wave and get closer to Nopraptor. Each time you hit him, he switches to the other side of the arena and does the same thing. Eventually, he sits in the center and launches skulls at you until you whack him enough for him to die, and his head to be severed. We take Nopraptor's pillar token, his severed head, and head out of his retreat. On our way out, we receive the mace, which can destroy boulders, letting us access many new secrets. We gain some magic recovery speed and find another spirit forge before we come upon the town of Korhagen. If you remember the beginning of the game, Kain says he is from Korhagen. This is his homecoming of sorts, but he doesn't treat it like normal. Kain speaks of Korhagen like he speaks of everything in Nosgoth, with disdain and vitriol. A plague has been terrorizing Korhagen for a while now, and bodies crest every avenue and street of the town. There's some speculation that Kain was originally fleeing the plague, which is why he was traveling on the road at the beginning of the game. With Korhagen being blighted by the plague, we cannot feed here, as the blood is tainted. In Korhagen, we gained some very useful upgrades, including bone armor, which causes smaller undead enemies to ignore Kain, and the repel spell. The repel spell is super useful as it repels magical attacks, creating a barrier around Kain. Making our way through Korhagen is much different than the previous towns and villages we've come across. The dead litter the streets, and you can clearly see the effects that the plague has wrought on this place. Very few humans still inhabit this place, and they're instead replaced by necromancers and their minions. After Korhagen, we see Malek's Bastion, sitting atop a snowy mountain overlooking Nosgoth. This thread of the Guardians placing their bases above cities is important. Before the Circle was corrupted, this would have been to oversee the world they sought to protect. Now it stands as a testament to their perceived place above the lowly folk of Nosgoth. Kain doesn't waste time heading for his next kill, making his way across the snowy mountain and entering the fortress that is Malek's Bastion. This next boss dungeon is huge and much larger than Nopraptor's retreat. As we make our way through the chthonic fortress of steel and screams, we fight many of Malek's warriors. Soon you realize that Malek is creating these warriors from strange magical machines hidden away in the back rooms of his palace. Our goal here is to shut these machines down. Eventually we find the orb powering them and destroy it. Then we make our way to Malek himself. The Malek fight is also pretty simple, especially with the repel spell. You have to knock Malek down 3 times. After the first time, he starts firing off bolts of energy. With repel, this is really just hitting him over and over until he collapses. After Kain knocks him down the 3rd time, he realizes he is outmatched and retreats. We gain the axes of Havoc and Malice, which can do this sick blade spinning thing and just cut down entire groups of enemies. This attack doesn't always work great because it can be interrupted by other attacks, but when I could pull it off and kill multiple enemies at once, it was incredibly satisfying. The axes also have the downside of not being able to cast magic when using them. They give us the additional ability of being able to cut down large trees, opening up more areas for us to explore. Kain heads back to the Pillars of Nosgoth to seek out Ariel's advice on Malek. She tells him to journey east of Malek's Bastion and find the Oracle. This is where we start to see echoes of the hero's journey. It's interesting what Silicon Knights did with Blood Omen, because while we are on a grand adventure of failure and redemption, one classic to many myths of old, Kain is also constantly expressing his disdain for the world, his hatred for anything happy, and his joy at the suffering of others. On our way to the Oracle, we find a blood fountain that makes snow not hurt us. Vampires are interesting in this world. They cannot touch water of any kind, including rain and snow. They also feed differently than traditional vampires, in sort of a telekinetic way. They draw the blood of their victims from a distance. The sun can also harm Kain if he hasn't acquired the proper blood fountains. Kain makes his way to the Oracle's caves, hidden in the same snowy mountain it shares with Malek's Bastion. This is where you really start to see the work that Silicon Knights put into this game. The Oracle's caves are massive, and I'm sure I didn't explore every single centimeter of this place. When talking about the development, it's apparent what the expansion of Silicon Knights' team meant for this game. These tile sets and enemies have clearly been expanded upon from their original conception. We make our way through various shivering and frozen caverns to finally find the seat of the Oracle. One thing I haven't talked about yet in Blood Omen is Vista Markers. Vista Markers are Blood Omen's way of delivering us narrative information. It's the predecessor to things like lore books, examining items, and narration just being triggered by certain events. They appear in the game world as little triangular glyphs on the ground.
Hidden amidst the many obscure artifacts in that museum, I discovered an ancient chronicle. This passage caught my eye. It was during these dark times infested with the plague of the undead that the Circle brought the Seraphan to existence.
They can show road markers for towns, a switch to Kain's perspective of the world like in Noopraptor's Retreat, or outside of Malek's Bastion, or even just Kain's narration.
Odd. This armor resembled that of the Ward and his minions, yet the steel seemed newly fashioned and untarnished by time.
These Vista Markers are used perfectly in the room outside of the Oracle's seat. There are 5 Vista Markers here, all optional, that can be triggered to hear Kain examining items on the floor or the walls of the room. This gives us greater context into the Oracle himself and the world around us. This would appear in modern games as investigating items in a room to solve a crime or find out more about the world. Here, in its elementary form, its purpose is still fulfilled, and in a very inventive way for its time. We talk to the Oracle and he starts to hint at time. Conquer time or it will conquer you, which will become very important and a recurring theme throughout the series. He tells us to seek out the vampire Vorador, the man we saw slaying Malek at the beginning of the game. We also get our first in-world introduction to King Otmar, who will be a very important character in a bit. With that, we head to Vorador's mansion. Before we enter his mansion, though, we gain some very useful abilities, including Mist Form, an ability which lets us move across water or any other treacherous substance of the ground with ease. We can also slip through cracks in walls to access secret areas, and when in this form, cannot be hit by physical attacks. We also gain some strength from a blood fountain, a flaming sword, and a mind control spell. The mind control spell is very interesting, and its dungeon is also the first appearance that I can tell of missable secrets, or at least intentional ones. With the mind control spell, you fire a projectile that takes control of an enemy. You can then control them while you have magic to use, but other enemies will still automatically attack you. Why, I'm not sure. In this dungeon, there are some unreachable areas that can only be accessed with this spell, and if all your expendable enemies die, you can't get those secrets. I thought this was pretty cool, because up until now, most secrets have just been hidden rooms or hard-to-access upgrades, but now the stakes have been raised. With these upgrades, we make our way to Vorador's mansion. On the way, Kain questions why a vampire as legendary as Vorador would place his hideout in such a treacherous place for a vampire. I also want to clarify something here about the story. I found the past events that are shown in FMVs at the beginning to be a little confusing, so I just want to make it clear so everyone understands moving forward. The Circle of the Nine and the vampires are separate entities. It can be hard to discern who is the good guys and who are the bad guys in Kain's story, but that's kind of the point. Blood Omen houses a difficult story, one that challenges the viewer to interpret. The Circle, the vampires, and the Seraphan are all separate entities. The Seraphan, the vampire hunters, were created by the Circle as a response to the increasing and encroaching vampire population. This is why Vorador killed 6 of the Circle and Malek, the leader of the Seraphan. Then Malek became one of the members of the Circle as a damnation. Vorador's mansion is also massive. The dungeons become larger and larger as we move forward in the game. The entire house is dotted with blood, humans ready for sacrifice, and torture devices. When he finally meets Vorador, he is disgusted, seeing a vision of what he could become if he lets this curse take hold of him. To Kain, Vorador is a vision of his possible future. Vorador tells Kain that as vampires, they are gods, and that the mortals offer their blood as sacrifice. Kain believes this deep down. He knows Vorador is right, but still thinks that Vorador has fallen for the pitfalls of decadence.
I pondered this as the decadent old fool prattled on about his past.
Vorador recounts his killing of the Circle and tells Kain to not concern himself with the affairs of man. Vorador gives Kain a ring which he can use to summon Vorador if he needs help. After Kain leaves Vorador's mansion, Mortanius chimes in, telling him that a triad congregates at the roof of the world. 3 of the Circle of Nine's guardians are plotting their machinations for Nosgoth at Dark Eden. Dark Eden is described as a garden of horrors created by Dejul, Bane, and Anakroth. Dark Eden is filled with lava, disgusting creatures with green blood, and a central tower spewing with corrosive energy. All of the enemies here are people who have been swallowed up by Dark Eden's power, twisted and turned into abominations. There's a wonderful sound effect that emits from one of these creatures that shoot projectiles that's about 6 times louder than anything else in the game, which is pretty cool and not annoying at all. Eventually, we reach the sanctuary at the center of Dark Eden. While infiltrating the fortress, we receive the Flesh Armor, which pulls enemies' blood from them, and Spirit Death, a spell which pulls an enemy's soul from them. We reach Bane the Druid, Dejul the Energist, and Anakroth the Alchemist. Anakroth flees the scene, but not before summoning Malek. Kain summons Vorador with his ring, and the 2 recently summoned see it fit to have a rematch of sorts. Kain runs after Bane and Dejul, resulting in another boss fight. Fighting the 2 isn't particularly hard. You focus Bane at first, who is constantly running around the area turning grass into water, but not attacking you directly. Bane dies quickly, and Dejul, who is at the top of the arena shooting lightning projectiles at you, dies even quicker. Using Repel here and shooting projectiles at Dejul makes quick work of this fight. Kain picks up Bane's antler headdress and Dejul's insulating cloak. He heads back into the previous room to see that Vorador won the fight against Malek, taking Malek's helmet as his token. Kain returns to the Pillars of Nosgoth and restores nature, energy, and conflict. Ariel then sends Kain to Avernus, where Azimuth the Planer dwells. Azimuth has turned mad due to the Pillar's corruption and has begun unleashing hordes of demons on the town, from his cathedral to the south. Avernus is massive, and its streets are filled with piled bodies blocking your way. Other than the dead humans, large demons are the only things that roam the streets. Making your way through Avernus can be confusing. You're mostly weaving through buildings into the sewers and back out again until you find a valid path to the south. Kain reaches Avernus Cathedral and begins to infiltrate the place. Azimuth is a planar, therefore the bounds of the planes of existence here are shifted. We are constantly jumping through teleporters into another realm to flip switches and open doors back on the other side. This is the earliest and most rudimentary form of the main mechanics we'll see show up in the Soul Reaver series. Kain makes his way through the cathedral and gains two very important items, the Wraith Armor and the Soul Reaver. The Soul Reaver will be a very important item moving forward, not just for this game, but for the entire series, obviously. It's a wavy blade with a skull at the hilt that can pull the souls of its enemies from their bodies, and it's by far the most satisfying weapon to use in the game. When you kill an enemy with it, they explode, their limbs flying all over the screen. Kain makes his way through the cathedral and finds Azimuth the Planar. This fight is pretty simple, using Repel and our newly found Soul Reaver. The only downside to the Soul Reaver, like other two-handed weapons, is that you can't cast spells with it. I had to cast Repel while I had the Flaming Sword equipped, and then switch to the Soul Reaver mid-battle to counteract this. Kain takes Azimuth's eye and heads for the Pillars of Nosgoth, but before he leaves he finds a time-streaming device in the cathedral. When he delivers the eye to Ariel and the Pillars, she remarks that it will deliver him in time. She also tells him to turn his focus to the armies invading from the north, the Nemesis known previously as William the Just. These are the armies that the humans have been too occupied with to hunt vampires in recent years. Ariel also tells Kain that to find our next member of the Circle, we must understand his machinations. On our way to Willendorf, we gain a new spell, Spirit Rack, which is just mind control but through walls. We also gain some strength and some magic regeneration. Once Kain reaches Willendorf, he realizes that he cannot enter the city unless he appears like a noble. Our current spell of Disguise won't do it, so we venture to a cave to find a stronger one. With this, Kain gains entry into the court of King Otmar, who is lamenting the lost soul of his daughter. On her birthday, Otmar created a contest, one to create the finest doll in the realm, and the winner would be granted a royal favor. Elzevir, the doll maker, created a toy of such beauty that all were captivated by it, and he took a lock of the princess's hair as payment. Shortly after this, she became lifeless. Otmar wants Kain to journey north to Elzevir's mansion and retrieve his daughter's soul, and in return, he will be given rulership of Willendorf. We make our way through a snow fortress and pass by Stahlberg, a town ravaged by the armies of the Nemesis. There are bodies strewn about on pikes and piles of lifeless humans block our paths. We see a statue constructed in the likeness of William the Just, and we see William's armies themselves. We'll come back to those later, but for now, Kain heads off to Elzevir's mansion, just to the west. Kain makes his way through the tricksy and horrific halls of the mansion, while we see a drastically different tone than we did in the other areas of the game. This is probably a good time to talk about the music of Blood Omen, as it plays a significant part in the mansion. Blood Omen's soundtrack was composed by Steve Hennepin and Scott Shelley. During the entire game, there's this motif of choral arrangements, building orchestras and violins. It all mirrors the biblical epic and vampiric tone of the rest of the game. But this all changes when we enter Elzevir's mansion. This whole section feels a bit out of place in story and also tonally. I feel that it shifts us away from the main story to this side quest of helping out King Otmar. The music for the mansion changes to this spooky, whimsical toymaker music. The track itself fits with the area, but the area is out of place in its own right. I don't think this would have felt as shoehorned in if it had appeared earlier in the game, but this late in the story, it just doesn't sit right with me. Kain makes his way through the mansion, encountering Elsevier's exploding doll minions, and finds Elsevier himself. Elsevier is another pretty simple boss. We defeat him using repel and hitting him over and over. Once he's dead, Kain retrieves the princess's soul and brings it back to King Otmar. Kain refuses the rulership, but accepts Otmar's armies instead. This causes Otmar to lead the army of the Last Hope in a skirmish with the legions of the Nemesis. This entire battle is called the Battle of the Last Stand. As every other event in this game, we see this battle through Kain's eyes. Kain is fighting with the Last Hope, but as he ventures north, he's satiating himself on members of the Hope and the Nemesis alike to keep his strength. Otmar is killed, and he uses his last words to beg Kain to destroy the Nemesis. The army of Hope flees as the tide of battle turns in the Nemesis' favor. Kain is backed into a corner and uses his last option, the time-streaming device he found in Avernus. With this, the landscape around him changes. To find out what's going on, he reads a victim's thoughts and sees Mobius the Time Streamer rally crowds of people for an onslaught. Kain realizes he's been transported back in time 50 years to the reign of William the Just, before he became the Nemesis. Kain ventures through the stronghold of William the Just and overhears a conversation between him and Mobius. Mobius is providing William with weapons and warning him of a vampire assassin incoming. That's us. Kain finds William and they go to battle. This boss fight was a hack-and-slash fest. William takes a while to be downed. We take the usual strategy of repel and hacking him to death. Kain kills William the Just, and before we get to the conclusion of this game, I need to explain something really quick. You're probably looking at this fight and wondering how William's blade looks just like our Soul Reaver. Well, that's because it is the Soul Reaver. During this battle between Kain and William, they face off with the same legendary blade. This is what's called the First Paradox in Legacy of Kain lore speak. This has major ramifications later on outside of this game, and we'll get to that in a bit, but just know that the original timeline that we were a part of leading up to this is dead, and we've now spawned a new timeline moving forward. With William's death, Kain heads back to his time, thinking the conflict solved. He returns to Stalberg to find Vorador being executed, as Mobius is again rallying the population against vampires. The people turn on Kain as they always have, and we track Mobius through the town. He sends enemies from the past, present, and future at us, one of them being a vision of Kain himself. This ends with Mobius's death and Kain delivering the epic line,
"You have seen my plan, vampire, as I've seen your destiny. The future says you die. But I am dead."
Kain heads back to the Pillars to see Mortanius and Anacroth arguing. Anacroth accuses Mortanius of betraying the Circle and reveals that Mortanius had Kain killed to destroy the Circle. Mortanius justifies this by noting the Circle's ruined nature and its corruption. Mortanius kills Anacroth and his pillar is healed. Kain reveals himself and the two fight. Mortanius takes a few hits from our flaming sword and then changes form. Mortanius has been possessed by the dark entity and transforms to that of a huge demon. The final boss battle sees Mortanius phasing into the ground and back out again. Every time he pops up, he'll do big damage to Kain if he's in the way. This is easily negated by, you guessed it, repel, and with that, the Dark One is defeated. After this, Kain is confronted with the knowledge that he is the Guardian of Balance, the last member of the Circle of Nine, and he has two options. One is to sacrifice himself, killing off the vampires forever and healing the Circle for good, or to destroy the Pillars and accept himself as a god. There are two endings to the game, but only one is canon, as we'll see in further entries of the series. The good ending sees Nosgoth brought back from ruin and the elements balanced once again, with Ariel giving us a little narration. The bad ending, which is canon, sees Kain accepting himself as a god and realizing that what Vorador said is true. Kain sits atop a throne of bones, drinking a chalice of blood, falling to the decadence that he so despised in Vorador. With that, we're done with Blood Omen. Before we move on to cut content, I want to talk a bit about Kain. Kain is definitely an anti-hero, and even the developers described him as one in their original philosophy for the game. But Silicon Knights takes this to a 10. Usually the anti-heroes that we see today are redeemable in some way. They're bad people, sure. They might be cocky, narcissistic, or violent, but they have rules, boundaries, and morals. Tony Soprano is a mob boss who kills people, but loves animals.
It's great!
Kain doesn't love animals. Walter White deals drugs and is a murderer, but loves his family.
Where is the money?
Kain doesn't even have a family, and if they were alive in Corhagen, he sure didn't care. Don Draper sells cigarettes for a living and cheats on his wife, but he tries to do the right thing. Kain doesn't even care what the right thing is. Kain could be described as an anti-hero, but I think the great thing about Blood Omen is that we're not seeing the birth of an anti-hero. We're seeing the birth of a villain. After Blood Omen, Silicon Knights would not work on another Legacy of Kain game, so I'm not sure if what the series is now is what the original developer had intended for it. In fact, I'm sure it's not. We'll get a bit more into that once we talk about Soul Reaver, but in the context of our series right now, we're seeing the rise of Kain as a villain, a father and god of all vampires. Getting us to play as him in the beginning of the series is an amazing move, and lets us sympathize with him easier. Blood Omen's gameplay is a bit dated, but it wasn't anything unplayable. It still works as a classic top-down action-adventure game. The myriad of secrets, upgrades, abilities, spells, and forms provide a wide breadth of choice in this story-focused title. Before we move on, let's look at what wasn't in Legacy of Kain: Blood Omen. Blood Omen has quite a bit of cut content, as do most of the games in this series. Originally, there was another planned weapon to be included in the game, acting as a pair to the bone armor that we do see in the retail version. This was called the Bone Sword. No in-game characteristics of this item exist, but the hilt of the sword survived into the introductory cutscene as Vorador's sword. Early builds of the game also included a 5-tiered magic system, where Kain could upgrade his magic meter to full 5 times. Each time would result in the color of the magic meter changing, going from purple to blue, green, orange, and red. This coloring scheme is in the final version of the game in the form of the magic refill orbs, notating how potent a single orb can be. Force Shield and Magic Absorb were 2 spells which didn't really make it into the game. Force Shield would protect Kain from physical attacks, and Magic Absorb would protect from magic or projectile attacks. They each had their own dungeon, and Force Shield was almost required to access Malek's Bastion, as the whirling blades would one-shot you without it. Magic Absorb just ended up being Repel, and it seems that the effects of Force Shield were lumped into Mist form. There's some speculation from the community considering a shield that was originally planned for the game. This comes from a shield mural seen early in the game in Noctolm. Most floor murals in the game indicate some sort of items being obtained there, and the shield doesn't fit this pattern. That being said, the developers have made no comment on this, and there isn't any further evidence I could find of the shield. 3 crypt dungeons were cut from the game 4 months before release, that were similar to Kain's mausoleum. They were included in the same cemetery, and would provide some missable health and magic upgrades. Some blood fountains were also removed from the game, one providing Kain permanent protection from the swamp around Vorador's mansion, and the other enhancing his vampiric abilities. My speculation here is that the latter would have drawn more blood from enemies, but there's no evidence for that. A removed dungeon, outpost, town with a well, a frozen town, a pirate ship, and changed Repel dungeons, Avernus City, and Willendorf Tunnel are among some of the other removed areas from the game. There's some evidence to show a character named Lupo the Butcher was removed from the game as well, and that he may have been located in Nookraptor's retreat. Originally, we were supposed to see Kain's death in cinematic form, rather than in-game, and another FMV was supposed to show Kain escaping Malek's Bastion, followed by it exploding. In Vorador's mansion, Kain was originally put to the test with a human chess match. He had to use the mind control spell to control people on the board. This was eventually cut towards the end of development because it just wasn't working very well. There are alternate world maps, small changes to Stahlberg, an original open-world design, and a sequence in which Mortanius' nature is revealed. Blood Omen's cut content is vast, but doesn't begin to rival the other games in the series, or what we know about the games that never were. With that, let's talk about Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. Development on Soul Reaver began with Crystal Dynamics, and it's kind of a rocky and vague situation. Originally, Soul Reaver was being designed as a game that had nothing to do with Legacy of Kain, called Shifter. Crystal Dynamics' Amy Hennig and Seth Karras were credited for the original concept. They started prototype work with a small team in 1997 and began full production in October of that year. No actual production work was done on the game before it was changed to Soul Reaver, but it had the same general concept. You played as a character who could shift between two realms, and the story featured the main character being cast down by his master. At this time, Silicon Knights were exploring the idea of making a prequel to Blood Omen, focused on exploring the character Vorador. Crystal Dynamics decided to make a Legacy of Kain sequel and changed the main antagonist of Shifter to Kain, and the protagonist to Raziel, taking place in Nosgoth. Silicon Knights saw this and filed an injunction against the company. The whole situation is foggy as to what actually happened. Amy Hennig could not comment on the situation other than that the issue was resolved. Dennis Dyack had stated that Crystal Dynamics took the series in a direction that they would not have. In the end, rights to the series shifted to Crystal Dynamics. Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver then went into full development with an $8 million budget. As I said before, Amy Hennig had returned from Blood Omen to work on this sequel in the series. Legacy of Kain would become her brainchild and would stay as one of the highlights of her career in the industry, as she's now famous for her work on the Uncharted series. Hennig said the crew was eager to combine the very best action mechanics from Blood Omen in the areas of combat, exploration, and puzzle solving, with storytelling that was deeply integrated into the gameplay. It's clear the team was eager to move forward with the series, building on the already large amount of lore that Silicon Knights had created for Blood Omen. The team developed a new engine for the game based on the proprietary one used for Crystal Dynamics' game Gex 3. It had real-time environment morphing and data streaming functionalities that eliminated loading pauses prevalent in games of the time. This would also improve on one of Blood Omen's biggest weaknesses. The story was influenced heavily by John Milton's Paradise Lost, and served as a jumping-off point for the team. The team also cited mythology and theology as great inspirations, which show up in the games as themes of mysticism and metaphysical concepts. Soul Reaver was originally slated for an October 1998 release, but was delayed several times until its release in August of 1999. Hennig later commented that they had previewed the game to the press too early, and that they had over-designed the game. This caused a lot of content to be cut before release, which we'll look at in a bit. Let's get into the actual game, shall we? Legacy of Kain starts off with one of the best video game intros ever made. Here we are introduced to Raziel, a vampire offspring of Kain. Raziel was actually the first of Kain's lieutenants and is therefore the oldest of his brothers. He and his brothers have clans of vampires across the realms of Nosgoth. Raziel approaches Kain to show him his new transformation, a pair of wings. Kain sits upon his throne on the ruined pillars of Nosgoth, a testament to his acceptance of godhood so long ago. Kain is jealous of this, seeing this as a mirror of his own weakness, and rips Raziel's wings off in protest. Kain then has Raziel's own brothers toss him off into the abyss as punishment. This whole cinematic takes place 1500 years after the events of Blood Omen. Much time has passed, Nosgoth is changed, turned into a ruined landscape of corruption and vampirism. In the early years of the rise of vampires, Kain raised his vampire clans, and within 100 years, humanity had been thoroughly domesticated. Raziel also notes something interesting in his voiceover, that few know the truth of Kain's story, that he was once mortal. This shows that Kain has deified himself in this world that he has constructed, He has turned himself into a god in the eyes of his subjects, and the events of Blood Omen are now myth. When Raziel shows him his evolution, this can only be seen as a transgression in Kain's eyes. Not just a transgression to his own supremacy, but a transgression to the world Kain has created for himself. I really want to focus on the music here before we get too deep into the story. The main theme of this game, which is introduced in the cinematic, is fantastic. It's got these booming, spectral, shining noises. Your ears are surrounded by the banging drums, which give you an ominous feeling, especially in this context. The whole soundtrack is this kind of industrial, ethereal, Egyptian-influenced fusion. It works incredibly well for developing this post-apocalyptic vampire-corrupted world. I'll talk more in depth about the music in Soul Reaver 2, but for now, let's get into the story. When Raziel is tossed into the abyss, he experiences 500 years of pure torture and agony, burning in the fires of the Lake of the Dead. After these 500 years, Raziel awakes in the spectral realm. A voice speaks to Raziel from the depths and tells him that he's resurrected him to become his Soul Reaver and kill Kain to restore balance to Nosgoth. Raziel's betrayal at the beginning of Soul Reaver has direct comparisons to that of Kain's at the beginning of Blood Omen. Both noble in some way, higher ranks in an already set social standing. They are both ripped from the lives they know and made to experience some terror, some tragedy. They then awake in this new life, a new form, new powers, to learn and explore. Both also awake with a hatred and a want for revenge. This is where the two start to differ. They both have disgust and contempt, but Kain's contempt is for the world around him. Raziel's disgust is inward, for himself. Because of the vampiric influence over the world, the Elder God tells Raziel that the souls of the world are trapped, unable to move on. This is causing the balance of the world to be thrown off, and he needs Raziel to free these souls so that the wheel of fate may once churn again. Controlling Raziel, we journey through the underworld and are introduced to our new powers. We can glide across long distances with our torn, wraith-like wings. We can also devour souls, replenishing our health, much like Kain draining his enemies in Blood Omen. The Elder God also shows us warp gates, doorways that can lay a path across great spans. Eventually, we encounter the Slough, spectral predators that feed on souls. The main mechanic of this game and most of the future entries is shifting. Raziel can shift to the spectral realm when he pleases. He can use this to recuperate and gain more health. He can only shift back to the material realm when he's at full strength, and when he has a planar portal in front of him. When Raziel dies in the material world, he is transported to the spectral realm, but when he dies there, he's transported back to the Elder God. This is not only used as a death mechanic, but also to solve puzzles. Things in the spectral realm are changed, and some areas might be inaccessible in the material realm that aren't in the spectral. Raziel also cannot interact with physical things in the spectral realm, so if he wants to open a door or weigh down a block, he has to find a way to shift back. When Raziel first shifts to the material plane, he sees that Nosgoth has changed since he was executed by the hands of his brothers. The first enemy we encounter here are that of the Dumahim, Duma's vampire clan and their descendants. They have turned into foul, scuttling beasts. Duma is another of Kain's vampire officers, one of Raziel's brothers. Raziel returns to the Lake of the Dead where he was cast down, and heads towards his own clan territory. Once he arrives, he finds it desolate, and learns that his clan has been eradicated by Kain himself. Raziel finds a necropolis that's been inhabited by his brother Malchiah and his clan. His descendants have been twisted and malformed as well, with pointed ears and gray skin. Soul Reaver has an interesting combat system when you're in the material plane. You're mostly just fighting vampires, and vampires cannot be killed by wounds of the flesh. They must be staked, burned, or tossed into water. We can attack enemies until they are dazed, but then must either pick them up and take them to an environmental object to finish them off, or grab an object from the wall. This new combat system provides a lot of player choice as to how you want to carry out combat encounters, and makes the game much more interesting. Switching between the material and spectral plane also has its advantages. In the spectral world, time does not move, so we can't physically change the makeup of the world, meaning moving boxes for puzzles and such. But the world itself changes in the spectral realm. Walls might jut out where they weren't in the material, giving us access to higher places. Inside the necropolis, Raziel finds his brother Malchiah, who has transformed into a bloated mass of decay, covered by the flesh of his victims.
Everyone is afraid, sibling. You awake to a world of fear. These times of change are so unsettling.
Malchiah tells Raziel that he awakes to a world of fear, and that he is disgusted with his own new form. The Malchiah fight is our first boss fight in Soul Reaver, and it's a large change from Blood Omen. Where the previous game's bosses were mostly hackfests and using spells, Soul Reaver usually sees you outwitting your opponents. We have to use gates and bring them down on top of Malchiah to damage him, eventually trapping him underneath a grinder and smashing him to bits. After his death, Raziel gains the ability to phase through gates. We can now gain access to other areas in the world by shifting to the spectral realm and venture further across Nosgoth. We're also introduced to artifacts that increase our health if we collect enough of them. We also obtain our first glyph, an object that will provide us with a new spell to use. In this case, we find the Force Glyph, giving us the ability to throw enemies backward with telekinesis. Raziel returns to the Pillars of Nosgoth and finds Kain sitting atop his throne. Raziel expresses anger at Kain for destroying his clan and turning him into this new, disgusting form.
I am your creation, Kain. Now, as before, you criticize your own work. What have you done with my clan, degenerate?
He tells Kain that he's not God and rejects his apparent genocide. Kain says one thing here that starts to change the way we view him drastically.
Only when you have felt the full gravity of choice should you dare question my judgment.
He then asks Raziel if he could even conceive of what choice he would make if he were in Kain's position, and Raziel responds with judgment again, telling him he would choose integrity. Kain brings out the Soul Reaver and we enter our second boss battle. This fight's pretty simple and just sees Kain teleporting around the pillars. We have to hit him before he charges up. Once we hit him 3 times, we're done. Kain hits Raziel with lightning and goes to attack him with the Soul Reaver, and it shatters. Kain is apparently satisfied with this and laughs while he teleports away. The Soul Reaver's true form stands in the spectral realm, and Raziel gains the Wraith Blade, a version of the Soul Reaver that is bound to his arm. This is our new weapon, and we can use it only in the spectral realm when our strength is full. Before we move on, I want to talk about Kain. This small conversation that we just had with him is large, and it will have drastic implications moving forward. But this is the first inkling of development in Kain's character. In Blood Omen, his tone and view of the world was that of disgust and contempt. He made his way through Nosgoth, killing and delighting in the screams of others. At the end, he seems to have accepted godhood and the decadence that he so despised in Vorador. Even at the beginning of Soul Reaver, he seems to be a jealous and vengeful god, tearing out success in his group of vampire officers. Now we get to see a glimpse into that mind, and he tells us that the choices he has made were difficult. We see now that the weight of those choices was not carried so easily as it seemed. Ariel appears from behind one of the pillars and makes herself known to Raziel. She meanders to Raziel, her same old, vague, and cryptic self about the nature of the world, wondering if the past is always meant to repeat itself. She tells Raziel that she is bound to the pillars because of Kain's choice, and she tells Raziel that he can return here when he has need. She also gives us a vague instruction, just as she did in Blood Omen. The pillars are now a safe haven where we can restore our energy if need be. Raziel makes his way to the Silenced Cathedral, territory of the Zephonim clan. The cathedral was originally built as a weapon against Kain's empire. It was to blast a deadly hymn which would destroy all vampiric creatures in Nosgoth. But Zephon and his clan murdered the humans that lived there before they could fulfill their purpose. The Zephonim clan have turned into gangly, gray-skinned monsters who secure their prey in cocoons. They can climb on walls and crawl on ceilings, making them annoying. We make our way through this cathedral, weaving in and out of its massive pipes, solving puzzles and killing Zephonim. Eventually, we reach Zephon himself. Zephon now resides in a nest of sort and has turned into a monstrous arachnid-like creature. The brothers comment on each other's changed appearances, Zephon noting that Raziel isn't the handsome lieutenant that Kain once loved. The Zephon boss fight requires you to hit him with a flaming egg 3 times. To do this, you can hit his appendages that hang from the ceiling and make an egg pop out of him. Ew. You have to grab the egg, set it on fire, and then throw it at Zephon, all while he's swiping at you and trying to snatch you up. Each boss in this game is a reflection of themselves, and a reflection of what they have become. Their leagues of vampires have also each devolved to be more like their masters. Not only is this true in a story sense, but shows its face in gameplay as well. The Zephonim can scale walls, and so can Zephon, so I'm sure you can guess what power we're about to gain. Raziel heads back to the pillars, and Ariel gives him another riddle.
Beyond these pillars, the defiled victim mutely screams its outrage.
What does that mean? With this, Raziel heads to the Tomb of the Seraphan. This is the resting place of the vampire hunters from the time of Blood Omen. The Elder God tells Raziel to take heed because a forgotten history lies within the tomb. Raziel reveals the tombs that lay beneath the structure. They show the names of him and his brothers. He realizes in an instant that he was once a Seraphan, before he was turned into one of Kain's officers. This is Raziel's revelation moment, as he realizes that not only was his life as a vampire a lie, because he was betrayed by his brothers and master, but he was already ripped from a previous conquest to fight against his real brothers in unlife. This only adds to the fuel firing Raziel's anger towards Kain and his transgressions. Interestingly, there's a tomb for Malek here, but his body was not actually buried there. Raziel makes his way through an underground tunnel, and we fight a mini-boss, a Turalim vampire, who shoots force projectiles, at us. We gain the ability to fire force projectiles, which will be used to solve puzzles in the future. I should talk about glyphs here. Glyphs are optional items. They kind of act as the secrets or forges of this game. You can gather them by solving extra puzzles, and they reward you with a new power. The glyphs that exist in the game are force, stone, sound, water, fire, and sunlight. The only super useful ones are the ones obtained at the end of the game, the fire and sunlight glyphs. The fire glyph will set on fire all common material enemies, and the sunlight glyph will char all nearby vampires to cinders. The rest of the glyphs in the game are mostly stun abilities, and I didn't find them all that useful. Raziel comes across the Rahabim, descendants of his brother Rahab, who have mutated and devolved into amphibians, getting over their own vulnerability to water. This sets the theme for this area as water. Rahab has turned into a merman, fish-like creature, and swims up to greet Raziel. Rahab tells him that Kain already warned him of his arrival, and Raziel responds by telling him the truth of their previous life. Rahab pays no mind to this, saying that Kain saved them from themselves. The Rahab boss fight consists of us jumping across pillars while avoiding his projectiles and trying not to fall in the water. Our goal here is to break the stained glass windows and reveal the sunlight to Rahab. It's over pretty quickly, and Rahab burns in the water, giving us the ability to swim. The Elder God tells Raziel that he must travel past the Lake of the Dead to his brother Duma's fortress. On our way, we gain the ability to imbue the Wraith Blade with fire, making killing enemies much easier. When Raziel arrives in Ash Village, he sees that the Dumahim are dead. He figures that Duma must have been killed by Kain. The Elder God corrects him, telling him that they were plagued by a vampire hunter ambush. The clan was too arrogant and complacent, not ready for the ambush when it came. Few remain of the Dumahim, and they are reduced to scavengers. Raziel finds Duma speared atop his throne. He notes that Duma would have been shamed to have Raziel find him here stuck like a pig. Raziel pulls the spears out of Duma's body, reviving him. Duma stands almost double Raziel's height, covered with an evolved armor. Duma expresses gratitude at the help of his brother, but Raziel notes that Duma was the one who threw him into the abyss. Duma tells Raziel that he is no match for him, and that not even Kain's power rivals his own. The Duma boss fight has us leading Duma into a furnace. You can barely get hit by him because he'll kill you fast, so we have to keep him just out of reach. We lead him through the courtyard and burn him to death, taking his power to constrict foes and move levers from a distance. Raziel makes his way to the Oracle Caves, the same place that Mobius stationed himself at in Blood Omen. When Raziel finds the place where we met Mobius before, he recalls the events of Blood Omen, telling us that he knows even more of the truth than we once thought. Raziel finds a statue of Mobius in the labyrinth and notes that the cold image radiated a certain undeniable power. Raziel also finds portals in the caves that show him images of past, future, and present. We see Raziel awakening from the 500 years of torment, and images of Kain breaking the Soul Reaver at the pillars of Nosgoth. Raziel asks if this has all been foretold, setting some sort of precedence for fate in the series that we'll come to talk about later. We also see Raziel finding his true nature in the tombs of the Seraphan, and Raziel thinks it must be Kain deceiving him. We see a vision of Kain and Raziel that has yet to happen, and a vision of Raziel cutting down Ariel with the Wraith Blade. A final vision is shown of Raziel wielding a red Wraith Blade. Each time we view a vision in the portals, the music cuts out and we can only hear screams and monstrous noises, the sounds of the time stream itself. Either way, its eldritch nature is kind of terrifying and unsettling. Raziel meets Kain in the Chronoplast, a time machine of Mobius's construction. Kain tells Raziel of the true power of knowledge, and how he did not understand it before. He also tells Raziel that he knew he would survive the Abyss, with his ability to hate. Raziel doesn't believe this and thinks it's more of Kain's tricks and lies. Kain regales their nature, telling Raziel that they are gods more now than ever, with the Chronoplast surrounding them, the ability to travel through time at their whim. He tells Raziel that free will is an illusion, and they are set on preordained paths, but Raziel is too concerned with his Seraphan origin to listen. He says that his decision to transform the Seraphan priests was based on their similarity, that because they were both concerned so much with Nosgoth's future, that they were one in the same. He tells Raziel that the Seraphan warriors were not altruistic as their goal was the same as the vampires. Raziel believes Kain to be lost in a maze of moral relativism. This philosophical conversation tells us a lot about both characters. Raziel is still filled with hate and vengeance, a mode that Kain seems to have moved past in the 2,000 years since Blood Omen. He has seen too much and done too much to worry about one person over the fate of Nosgoth or entire clans of people. We also gain the information that everything Kain has done has been for a reason. We just haven't been made aware of what that reason is yet. And now we fight. Kain's final fight is similar to that of the Pillars, just moving vertically now. Kain will teleport around the Chronoplast and we have to hit him before he hits us. After we hit him 3 times, the fight is over. Kain teleports to the Chronoplast lever and turns on the machine, and opens a portal.
You nearly had me, Raziel. But this is not where or how it ends. Fate promises more twists before this drama unfolds completely.
Raziel goes to chase him, but the Elder God tells him if he crosses into the portal, he will be beyond his influence. Raziel appears on the other side to see Mobius standing behind him. The sorcerer welcomes him to his destiny, and the game ends on Mobius's voiceover about time.
Where time is but a loop, a loose stitch in the universal cloth. A streamer might seize upon a chance, a fatal slip, and plunge the fate of planets into chaos.
Obviously, this story has much more to be revealed. Blood Omen was a bookend to an era in Nosgoth's history, an origin story for Kain and Nosgoth itself. Soul Reaver is the beginning of a new chapter in Raziel's story, Kain's, and Nosgoth. Raziel has grown. He knows more now than he knew when he was thrown into the Abyss. He thought himself a glorious warrior in Kain's conquest of Nosgoth. That all changed when he was tossed into the Lake of the Dead. That changed again when he realized his days of being a vampiric warrior were also a lie, and even his days as a Seraphan priest are uncertain. He has defeated his brothers and gained his vengeance on them, but Kain is elusive, and he's starting to realize that he's involving himself in a grand scheme that is much larger than himself. Kain started this story as a villain, one that cast one of his own sons into 500 years of agony and torture, and in our eyes, a bad guy. But at the end, even this is uncertain. We're not sure of Kain's plans or his machinations. He seems to have something larger up his sleeve. If he wanted to kill Raziel, he would have done so by now. What lies in the future will be seen in Soul Reaver 2. Soul Reaver is kind of an infamous entry in the series for cut content. As I said in the development section, estimates of a third of the game were cut just before release. It's known that the game would have played out much differently than the retail version of it did. Let's take a trip into the Chronoplast to look at an alternate future of Soul Reaver. Among abilities, Raziel was to receive an amplified force projectile spell that would be enhanced once he had defeated his brother Terrell. Multiple different versions of the Reaver were to exist in the game, the first being an amplified Reaver, which was going to be the ultimate weapon that you attain near the end of the game. Another version of the Reaver was the Ariel Reaver that would have been obtained after killing Ariel and consuming her soul. It's unclear as to whether this is distinct from the amplified Reaver or not. The player would also be able to obtain multiple elemental Reaver forms that would correspond with the different glyphs of Nosgoth. This included sunlight, water, stone, fire, sound, and spirit. Each form had a forge that Raziel would modify the Reaver from. This would go on to be used in Soul Reaver 2 and Defiance. Actually, a lot of the cut content of Soul Reaver would go on to show up in those two games. Originally, the game was supposed to continue past the Chronoplast, and there would have been a third act. After the Chronoplast fight, Raziel would have gained the ability to shift between planes at will. There were a lot of weapons deleted from the game before release, including a crossbow, flamethrower, knife, dart, and staff. These would have been environmental weapons, like the torch and spears we see in the retail version. 4 large areas were removed from the final version of the game, seeming to be the third act of the game. Raziel would have traveled to the Turalim clan territory and defeat his brother Terrell, before facing Kain a final time at a mountain retreat where Kain's throne room sat. After this final battle, Raziel would travel to the pinnacle of the Silenced Cathedral. Raziel would then use the cathedral as it was originally designed to wipe the vampires from the face of Nosgoth. There was a comic that was released after the game itself. It was only an issue long and saw Raziel feeding on a human, only to realize she's a construct of the Elder Gods, with neither mortal or vampire blood. She tells him of his future, and he sees the events of the Soul Reaver intro and some of the game happening. The interesting thing here is that the comic seems to work off the original version of the game's events. The priestess tells Raziel of the Silenced Cathedral and its bells ringing out across the land. I'm just going to assume that this comic is not canon, which is why I didn't mention it when talking about the main game. With the nature of Soul Reaver's release and development, a sequel was bound to happen. It was almost assured in the eyes of Crystal Dynamics, especially with the great success that the game saw in the eyes of consumers and critics alike. With this game, Crystal Dynamics split the series in two, the focus of Kain's development being the Blood Omen series, and the focus of Raziel's development being the Soul Reaver series. Though by the time development started on Blood Omen 2, it was placed on the back burner for the Soul Reaver sequel. Pre-production on Soul Reaver 2 began in late 1999, with a targeted release year of 2000. Amy Hennig's team at Crystal Dynamics created a proof of concept for E3 2000 and was announced as an exclusive title for the PlayStation 2. Upon inception, it was decided that the game would not be a traditional, complete-a-level, fight-a-boss type of game. The level designers wanted to move away from the abundant block puzzles ever present in the first Soul Reaver. They also wanted to focus on new mandatory enhancements for the Reaver. Soul Reaver 2's development also took great focus on the cinematic elements of Legacy of Kain. This can be seen clearly when playing the game, as the amount of cutscene time was almost doubled from the first entry. The team was also focusing on developing time travel rules and fleshing them out, as to not hinder production of the already started Blood Omen 2. The game's pacing was supposed to resemble a novel or film more than a game, which is why there aren't many boss encounters in the game. The team again was a little too ambitious with this entry, causing some game elements to be cut, just like every other entry in the series. In this instance, the cut content is understandable, as the game had a 17-month production schedule and was turned around very quickly. It was turned around so quickly, in fact, that Blood Omen 2 began development before it, but was released 6 months after Soul Reaver 2. We'll get to Blood Omen 2 later, but for now, let's continue Raziel's story. Soul Reaver 2 opens with a recap of the ending events of the first game, mainly the Chronoplast conversation with Raziel chasing after Kain. Raziel pops out of the portal and is confronted with Mobius. Raziel is aware of the transgressions of Mobius in the past and tries to attack him. His staff disables Raziel's Reaver, and he tries to reason with Raziel, telling him to spare his life. Mobius tells Raziel that Kain is his true enemy, and Raziel realizes that they are in the stronghold of the Seraphan Brotherhood. Raziel sees murals of Vorador murdering 6 of the members of the Circle around him. Mobius tells Raziel to seek out Kain at the Pillars of Nosgoth and is trying to sow vengeance back up in Raziel's eyes. Raziel makes his way through the stronghold and finds the tomb of William the Just, with his broken Soul Reaver itself lying on an altar to the man. Raziel being here causes distortions, making the world around him warp and throb. His Wraithblade remembers its corporeal form and binds itself to the physical Reaver, giving Raziel the ability to summon the blade in the material realm, though the blade is sentient and if used too much, will leech Raziel's own strength, causing him to lose health. Mobius appears and Raziel thinks this must be a trick of his, as Raziel always does, but Mobius begs for his life. Mobius tells Raziel that they serve the same god, our benevolent benefactor from the previous game, and Raziel spares Mobius's life, as his vengeance is too strong to let him get caught up in these matters. On his way out of the stronghold, Raziel is confronted with murals of his brothers, the Seraphan commanders, Turel, Rahab, Melchiah, Duma, Zephon, and a statue of Raziel himself. He also sees depictions of Janos Audrin and his defeat, his heart ripped from his chest by the Seraphan warrior priests. All of these things affect Raziel, especially seeing his former self so pure and righteous, comparing it to his current monstrous and twisted form. I didn't mention this in the Blood Omen review, but there's an item in that game that gives us an extra life. It's called the Heart of Darkness, and is a legendary item. It was ripped from the heart of Janos Audrin, one of the greatest vampires to ever live. Raziel leaves the Seraphan stronghold, and this is the first time that he is confronted with the images of Nosgoth's past. The lush green lands filled with forest and rushing waterfalls leave him breathless. He sees now that the Nosgoth of his day is nothing but a corpse left to rot. As we make our way to the Pillars of Nosgoth, we are introduced to new game mechanics. Soul Reaver 2 plays a bit different than the first game. We have beacons in this world that will bring us back from death in the spectral realm, and obelisks which will save our progress. I can't say I particularly love the combat in this game. The lock-on mechanism works alright, but the dodging doesn't. The camera is static, but the characters are always moving around, and the game just can't ever really figure out where I'm trying to go. This makes it difficult because most of the fights in this game require lock-on, or auto-face as they call it, and it makes a lot of situations tedious. We can still reave souls to restore health, swim in water, climb walls, glide, and fire projectiles. I like that Raziel keeps his augmentations from his brothers in the previous game. Most games try to make you have some sort of complete reset, but it was a nice touch that we're still playing as an evolved Raziel. As Raziel leaves the stronghold, he notes that he won't be able to enter it again without gaining some sort of power to open the fortress's door. Raziel arrives at the pillars to find Kain, who doesn't try to fight Raziel at all, but tries to reason with him. He picks apart Raziel's vengeance towards him and tells him that Raziel is doing exactly what he wanted him to. They both agree that the pillar's restoration is of utmost importance, and Kain tells Raziel that when he was faced with 2 choices, he chose a third. I wish I could just play this whole cutscene. Actually, I wish I could just play all of the cutscenes from Soul Reaver 2, but it would add to the already ridiculous length of this video. Kain tells Raziel when they are, which happens to be right at Kain's birth. If you remember, Kain was born at the moment of Ariel's death, destined to become the Balance Guardian, which means Raziel and Kain are talking just as Kain is being born and Ariel is dying. He tells Raziel that right about now, Noopraptor is finding Ariel's body and is streaming with madness. We then watch as before our eyes the pillars become corrupted. I will play this clip of Kain talking about his choice as Balance Guardian 30 years later, as he had destroyed the members of the Circle, because my writing can't do it justice.
30 years hence, I am presented with a dilemma. Let's call it a two-sided coin. If the coin falls one way, I sacrifice myself and thus restore the pillars. But as the last surviving vampire in Nosgoth, this would mean the annihilation of our species. Mobius made sure of that. If the coin lands on the reverse, I refuse the sacrifice and thus doom the pillars to an eternity of collapse. Either way, the game is rigged.
We agree then that the pillars are crucial and must be restored.
Yes, Raziel. And that's why we've come full circle to this place.
So after all this, you make my case for me. To end this stalemate, you must die so that new Guardians can be born.
Pillars don't belong to them, Raziel. They belong to us.
Your arrogance is boundless, Kain.
There's a third option. A monumental secret hidden in your very presence here. But it's a secret you have to discover for yourself. Unearth your destiny, Raziel. It's all laid out for you here.
You said it yourself, Kain. There are only two sides to your coin.
Apparently so. But suppose you throw a coin enough times. Suppose one day it lands on its edge.
Kain tells Raziel here that there is a third choice and that the pillars belong to the vampires, not Nosgoth. Raziel is obviously confused, as he kind of always is, but he knows something has changed. For the pillars to be restored, Kain must die. But Kain wants the restoration of the pillars. He wants balance, which he just happens to be the guardian of. Raziel heads north and, shifting to the spectral realm, finds the entrance to some subterranean ruins that lay beneath the pillars, the door to which can only be opened with Raziel's blade. In here, he discovers firstly that not only do the pillars extend into the sky, but they extend underground. He also sees murals, depictions of Nosgoth's early history, where an ancient winged race raised the pillars to defeat their foes. He sees the Reaver depicted in these murals as well, a holy symbol of sorts. Raziel also notices that his benefactor, the Elder God, is present here, lying in physical form underneath the platform that the pillars stand on. The Elder God is not happy and chastises Raziel for letting Kain slip through his fingers. Raziel takes a different tone with the Elder at this point, not necessarily believing anything he tells him.
You still need me.
This impudence is unworthy of you, Raziel. Do not forget that you have a task to fulfill here. You are indebted to me.
The Elder is obviously trying to get Raziel riled up, as he tells him to remember his rage. I think at this point in the story, Raziel is in an interesting spot. He's stuck in the past and not too sure what he's doing here. He just let his only living adversary slip through his fingers, the man he crossed the barriers of time to chase, get away. He did this because he's not sure he disagrees with him, and is surely curious as to what he's up to. He doesn't even trust the god that brought him back from the abyss, and he surely doesn't trust Mobius. He has no one, and really no mission at this point. He's lost and alone, without even purpose to guide him. Raziel ventures out of this chamber and makes his way into the surrounding swamp, where he finds one of Mobius's time-streaming chambers, which he can't access just yet. He sees someone watching him from a terrace, but then disappears. Raziel makes his way up to this terrace and finds the person gone, so he makes his way into the ruins surrounding him. Here is where we encounter our first forge, and I will say this is another negative but also a positive to this game. I go a little bit back and forth with my opinions on Soul Reaver 2, which we'll get into in full at the end. Soul Reaver 2 mostly replaced boss battles with these forges. They're large areas where you have to solve puzzles to gain an upgrade to your blade. This idea in concept is nice, but the execution falls a bit flat. For example, this ruin we're currently in is the Dark Forge. As we enter it, we see this sun disk off in the distance, but don't know how to get it, as the spectral world is just as blocked off as the material. What we need to do here is go into the material realm and climb up this wall at the beginning of the ruin, and make our way across the top of the room. Eventually, we reach the chamber above the sun disk with a rotating mirror but no sunlight. Eventually, you realize that you can shoot the icon in the ceiling to let the sun come in. But where is the sun supposed to go? The solution to this puzzle is moving the obelisk in front of the beam of light while it's pointed towards this new moon symbol. This will cast a shadow on it and reveal a hole in the wall that we can go through. The issue with this puzzle isn't its difficulty, and the solution wouldn't be just to include more hints. The issue is with the design of the puzzle. There's not really a way for me to know that I can move this obelisk, because all of the obelisks are planted in the corners. This could be easily fixed by putting one of the obelisks in the center of its track, showing the player that they can be moved. You could also just add a railing to the edge of the track to make it a little more obvious that there's a track there. Then the player can put 2 and 2 together to realize that you can cast a shadow with the obelisk. A lot of the puzzles in Soul Reaver 2 suffer from this design, and the designers themselves would even recognize it as such post-release, blaming it on the short development cycle. The shame here is that the puzzles themselves are interesting, they just aren't intuitive to the average player, meaning me, an adult man with dumb brain. As we move on through the forge, we solve another puzzle to cast light into the main room and place the sun disk on its dais. This reflects light onto this ball and fills our Reaver with dark energy. This is the first of many attunements we'll get in this game, and it's one of the new main mechanics that's introduced. These beacons around the world can switch the attunement of your Reaver to let you pass through doors or activate objects matching that attunement. This is a scrapped idea from Soul Reaver, one that was revamped and included in the sequel. As Raziel leaves the forge, he encounters Vorador, who knows not who or what he is. He gives Raziel the impression that he's important. He must be, because he has accessed secrets that have been hidden to all for centuries. He's also skeptical of Raziel's affiliation, wondering if he is the cause of the recent corruption of the Pillars. Raziel tells Vorador he is seeking answers, and Vorador tells him that Janos Audron is the only one with the answers to his questions, and unfortunately for them, he is long dead. Raziel makes his way back to the Seraphan stronghold to use Mobius's time streaming chamber and go back to the time of Janos Audron. First, we need to complete the Light Forge to get access. This forge is a great upgrade from the Dark Forge. We basically have to get the light from the back part of the chamber to the front and shine it on 2 gems so we can gather a sun symbol and place it on a pedestal. The puzzles here make sense though, they're intuitive, and you know what can be moved and what can't. We use our Dark Reaver attunement and the statue at the center of the forge moves. We gain our light attunement for our Reaver and head back to the Seraphan stronghold. This gives us entry back into that big door, and Raziel makes his way back through the stronghold. When he arrives at the altar of William the Just, Kain is waiting for him. This is where we're introduced to the idea of the first paradox. Kain tells Raziel that when he killed William the Just, he destroyed one tyrant in the Nemesis that would eventually overtake Nosgoth, but gave rise to another, in that of Mobius. He then tells Raziel that history is immutable, and that it can only be changed when one carries the Soul Reaver, and when 2 Reavers meet, this paradox can change history. Even Raziel and Kain being back in this era of time was destined to happen. Kain hands Raziel the physical Soul Reaver, which joins with the Wraith version, and tells Raziel to kill him. That is his destiny. But if Raziel truly has and believes in free will, then he will resist the forces of time. Raziel feels the force of the time stream on him, trying to force him to kill Kain, but he resists and avoids killing Kain. There's an earthquake of sorts, with eldritch noises coming from all around the two. Kain tells Raziel that the time stream is straining to divert itself, after their previous timeline had been dead-ended. This is the second paradox. Raziel is still hesitant to trust Kain, not understanding his true motivations, but he leaves the altar and heads towards the time-streaming chambers. Mobius confronts Raziel before he enters the chambers. He is scared and knows that Raziel must have changed time. He debates Raziel over what he's done, but Raziel tells him that he will be making his own choices from now on, choosing his own destiny. This is a large moment for Raziel. Up to this point, Raziel has been an agent of vengeance, especially in the first Soul Reaver. He is stricken with grief and disgust at himself and what the world has become. He wants nothing more than to get revenge on the people that have wronged him. At the beginning of this game, he's confused and lost without motivation or purpose, but now with the creation of the second paradox, Raziel has his own beliefs confirmed. He isn't an agent of destiny, he is his own master. He can make his own path, even if it requires great force and will. This is Raziel's central motivation. Raziel drags Mobius into the time-streaming device and makes him set the chamber up to the time before the Seraphan, hoping to meet Janos Audron and uncover the truth. Mobius does so, but urges Raziel against this choice. Before he sends Raziel through time, he gives off a knowing smile, something up his sleeve. Raziel appears again in the time-streaming chamber, but knows something is amiss. The stronghold around him is in ruins, derelict and destroyed. Demons begin to attack Raziel and the members of the Seraphan, and we can see that the stronghold has been invaded. Raziel finds a statue of Mobius in the stronghold, holding Vorador's decapitated head. Raziel quickly realizes that he's not in the past, but the future, and that Mobius has tricked him. Raziel finds Mobius's supposed ghost, who tells him that he had to send Raziel to the future to show him the error of his and Kain's decision. Mobius teleports away, leaving Raziel unaware of whether he is truly alive or dead. Before we get further down this path, I'd like to talk about combat a little more. I've waited a while to really dive deep into this game's combat because up until this point, it hasn't been a terrible issue. But Soul Reaver 2 has these big jumps in difficulty when it comes to enemies. With no boss fights, most of our fighting is done through small groups of enemies. Before we traveled to the future, we were really only fighting Seraphan members, undead in the forges, and the Slough that inhabit the spectral realm. That changes when we go to this era of Nosgoth's history. We're introduced to these demons, some with blades for arms and others with electrocuting abilities. There's two things that make these enemies particularly difficult. One is their increased strength. They hit hard and it doesn't take much to drain our recently increased health bar to 0. This wouldn't be so bad as the game is obviously trying to make us realize how powerful these enemies are. But the demons also follow you into the spectral realm. So as soon as you die, you're fighting the same enemies again and aren't really given a chance to recuperate before you're killed and forced to restart at a beacon. This can be quite annoying and frustrating, and it's really the point in the game where combat changed for me. It went from, okay, this doesn't work all that great, to, oh wow, I can't do anything. I'm hesitant to get too deep into the game mechanics because I am playing this on PC, and I'm not exactly sure what issues result from the PC port, or just this game's design. Raziel leaves the stronghold and heads to the pillars, finding Ariel there, and the pillars corrupted and destroyed. She laments her imprisonment at the pillars and says that it's Kain's fault that the world has become this. Raziel starts to defend Kain's decision, telling Ariel that it was calculated and purposeful. Raziel thinks that it might be too late to restore the pillars, and that killing Kain might not work any longer. Ariel tries to escape Raziel in the spectral realm and he shifts to find her. She asks for him to show mercy, but he tells her that she hasn't shown mercy to her fellow guardians, or Kain, or Noopraptor himself. Raziel decides to show mercy to Ariel and leaves the pillars for the chamber below. Raziel notes that the pillars are cracked and destroyed underground as well. The Elder God continues to chastise Raziel, telling him that this is the fate of Nosgoth as long as Kain remains alive. Raziel notices that the Elder God's body has begun to climb up the chamber, telling him that as Nosgoth suffers, the Elder God thrives. The Elder God describes himself as the hub of the wheel, the originator of all life and death. He then threatens Raziel and tells him that there are fates worse than death. Raziel journeys north into the mountains. The caves he's seen before changed. He finds Janos Audron's retreat, collapsed and broken, too late in time to make use of the place. Kain shows up, the two now having an almost playful banter. Kain warns Raziel that they are in great danger, the two being in a time where they do not belong. Kain says that they are marshalling great forces against them in some sort of grand conspiracy. Raziel thinks that this they is Mobius, but Kain tells him that he's just a puppet, and the two of them almost say that they are allies. Aw, my sweet boys. Kain explains the way that time works a little more, that if time cannot be reshuffled following a paradox, then the irritants, Raziel and Kain, will be expelled from time. Kain thinks that this is exactly what their enemies are trying to get to happen. Raziel makes his way to the Air Forge to obtain the third attunement to the Reaver. Inside, he finds murals confirming that long ago the winged race was involved in a legendary war, raising the pillars to win the war and being cursed with bloodthirst for their transgression. This is the creation of Nosgoth's first vampires. This forge isn't too bad, but I wasn't a great fan of it. It's pretty simple, the area just happens to be pretty large. It has the downside of demons, but that's more of a game downside and not specifically the Air Forge. We gather 3 different hearts from the annals of the chamber and return them to the mummies in the forge. This large head that looks like Aku from Samurai Jack comes alive and attunes our blade to air. With this, Raziel makes his way back to the swamp and finds the time-streaming chamber from earlier, now able to blow the doors off and venture inside. He hopes to hurl himself back in time to the days of Janos Audron. Raziel appears in the chamber again and journeys outside to find that he was in the era that he sought. He found Seraphan banners and vampires staked into the ground. Raziel finds the warrior priests of the Seraphan and grieves his lost virtue. Where his former want to be one of them was, now stood a sort of disgust for them and their order. Raziel finds Janos Audron's retreat still intact, but constructed for winged beings, preventing Raziel from reaching it. Raziel makes his way to the retreat, solving various puzzles, using the 3 Wraith attunements collected so far, and finds Janos himself. Finally, after all this time, we are confronted with Janos Audron, the Heart of Darkness himself, the greatest vampire to ever live. And he's fucking badass.
Raziel? My child, what have they done to you?
Janos knows who Raziel is, telling him that he's been waiting for thousands of years for Raziel. Janos Audron tells us a lot here. This is Raziel's culmination in his quest for information, but also our culmination of answers to our greedy lore questions. Janos tells Raziel that when the pillars were created, he was chosen as the 10th Guardian, the keeper of the Soul Reaver. His guardianship has sustained him since then, and the rest of their race has fallen into ruin. Because vampires are no longer born and just created, the pillars now choose human guardians, which makes humans believe the pillars are for them and not the vampire race. I want to talk about Janos for a minute, because in my opinion, he's my favorite character in Legacy of Kain. Janos Audron has been a myth, a legend, for the entirety of our story. Only mentioned in Blood Omen and Soul Reaver, he was the greatest vampire that ever lived. His very heart would revive us from death in Blood Omen, and in Soul Reaver, he is our ultimate quest for truth and answers. He's built up in the entirety of the first 2 acts of Soul Reaver too. This building up of a character can be amazing for a reveal, but it can also be hard to live up to that expectation. But Janos meets that expectation. First of all, his character is designed perfectly. He's a vampire, but not designed like the ones we've seen before, at least not like Kain and his army. He is beautiful, forever young, with black wings sprouting from his back to make him angelic. Damn, am I in love with a male video game character? His outfit is regal, posturing his evolved form, his ancient race, almost above humans. But he doesn't view himself this way. He's humble and understanding.
They know I'm up here, beyond their reach, and it terrifies them. You can see how they flaunt their kills to torment me, or perhaps simply to lure me out. They have this foolish notion that destroying me will somehow topple our entire bloodline. Thankfully, we're not that fragile.
His greeting to Raziel is warm, "My child." He knows that humans torment him and hate him, but he also knows that they're vulnerable to manipulation, and it's not their fault that they do not understand. He is an image of what vampires should be, what they were once, not the contempt-filled, disgusted, decadent monsters of Nosgoth's future. As Nosgoth died, so did the race of evolved beings, enlightened with understanding. Now, I'm not saying that every ancient vampire was like Janos, but Janos stands for something. Just as Raziel was breathless at the sight of Nosgoth's lush, green-filled land, I am breathless at Janos Audrin's cute little lips. Moving on. Raziel learns that he might be a messiah, and that dark powers are allied against him. Janos tells Raziel that the binding of the pillars must be secured, and that the Reaver is the key. Janos presents the Soul Reaver to Raziel, but he doesn't feel the time stream as he did before. Raziel feels unsettled as he sees the Reaver and tells Janos to take it away. At this moment, Seraphan warrior priests break into the retreat, and Janos martyrs himself, teleporting Raziel away to the Fire Forge. The irony that Janos might be murdered by the Crusaders that he just revered hits Raziel like a truck. He cannot get through the door to save Janos without the attunement of the Fire Forge. This forge is okay, albeit a bit hard. It's quite dark in here, but the forge is designed this way. We have to use our torch to light different braziers across the forge and use air streams to glide around. Eventually, we light a center dais and it charges the forge. Raziel receives the attunement to fire for his Reaver and makes his way back through the door, blocking his path to Janos. The Seraphan priests have Janos Audrin held to an altar, and one of them rips the Heart of Darkness from his chest. The priest notices Raziel as the world starts to quake. The priest is Raziel himself, and in this moment he realizes that he was the one who ripped Janos Audrin's heart from his chest. Janos tells Raziel with his dying breath that this was his purpose, to save Raziel's life, while Raziel took his own. He tells Raziel to realize his destiny, for without the sword there is no hope. With Janos' death, Raziel realizes his vengeance and vows to kill his Seraphan brothers and retake the Heart of Darkness and restore it to Janos. On his way back to the Seraphan stronghold, Raziel is confronted by time-traveling demons that are pursuing him throughout the time stream. Raziel converses with the Elder God once again on his way back to the stronghold, wondering if the Elder God actually resurrected him, or if he was just there when Raziel awoke from his torment. Raziel wonders about his own destiny and history, pondering the question as to why he seems to be tricked into death and rebirth time and time again. Raziel finds the Reaver again in the Seraphan stronghold, noting that he experiences this dread, but no temporal distortion as he had experienced in the chapel of William the Just. As he is compelled by the Reaver, he goes to take it, but before he can, Mobius appears again before him, telling Raziel that he is not as foolish as he has been playing. As Raziel goes to attack Mobius, he tells Malek to not let Raziel leave. That's right, that Malek. Malek tells Mobius that the circle is under attack as we hear screams from the other room. We can infer that this is Vorador slaughtering the circle, causing most of them to be reborn as new guardians. Raziel grabs the Soul Reaver, disarmed by Mobius's staff, and is trapped in this room alone. Raziel feels a strange sense of longing as the corporeal blade tries to embrace its wraith twin. Raziel is confronted by two warrior priests. He recognizes both of them as Melchiah and Zephan, his brothers in life and undeath. He kills them both, and Raziel can feel the Soul Reaver's consumption of his own rage, and its bloodlust at the death of Melchiah and Zephan. The Reaver makes Raziel invincible as it restores his strength as it's being used. Raziel is then confronted by Duma and Rahab. Raziel notes the irony of the situation, as his killing of his brothers would lead Kain to revive them as his vampire sons a millennium from now. Raziel then faces off against Turel, the other that threw him into the abyss at Kain's command, the one we never fought in Soul Reaver. Finally, Raziel is face to face with his human self. Raziel's human self antagonizes him, and Raziel runs him through with the Soul Reaver. This moment is of great significance in Raziel's story. This is not only him starting the events that would cause Soul Reaver, that would cause him to be cast into the abyss hundreds of years later, but it's him killing his own past. Of course, it always had to be this way. Raziel had to kill what he hated and once revered himself. To move on, he had to kill a part of himself that he might have once particularly liked. To journey further, he had to rid himself of something that he was once fond of. The symbolism is mwah. The Wraithblade uncoils and wraps itself around the Soul Reaver. Raziel feels lost and empty and realizes that without any other foes to slay, the Soul Reaver goes for him. Raziel realizes that the soul of the Reaver was his own, and it impales him. Raziel is unable to resist it.
Are you enjoying this game? Don't fight it, Raziel. Give into it. Was this your destiny for me all along? Trust me.
I felt myself weakening, unable to hold on any longer. The Reaver was too strong. The compulsion to simply let go, too great. And then, a growing sense of vertigo and the familiar displacement. The paradoxical moment when my twinned soul hovered both outside and inside the Reaver blade. This was the instant, the glimmer of temporal distortion Kain had been counting on all along. This was the edge of the coin, the minute flicker of probability upon which Kain had gambled everything.
Kain reveals himself and tells Raziel to not fight the blade. Raziel realizes his paradoxical nature, destined to be trapped here, his blade impaling him and his soul trapped, hovering inside and outside of the blade. Kain and Raziel both realize that there is a paradox happening, with the blades both present inside of Raziel, meaning that history can be changed. Kain seizes this moment and pulls the blade from Raziel's body, and causing the third paradox. Kain's face shows great horror, and Raziel thinks that the two may have introduced a fatal paradox, as the world warps and throbs around them once again.
Behind Kain's eyes, I could see new memories blooming and dying as history labored to reshuffle itself around this monumental obstruction. And I could see by the dawning horror on his face that perhaps we had strained history too far this time. That by trying to alter my fate, he may have introduced a fatal paradox.
My God. The Hilden. We walked right into their trap. Raziel, Janos must stay dead.
But Kain's warning was lost as I slipped into the spirit realm.
Kain is then flooded with memories and tells Raziel that they fell into the Hilden's trap and that Janos Audron must stay dead. At this moment, Raziel falls into the spectral realm, too weak to hold on to his material form. He is left with his own soul, the Wraithblade, and realizes that he had only postponed his destiny. The game ends with Raziel both lamenting his fate and realizing himself that history abhors a paradox. At the end of Soul Reaver 2, Raziel has grown greatly. His arc has been much more developed than it was in the first game. At the beginning, Raziel is a shadow of his master, seeking only vengeance in Kain. Through this story, he learns who he truly was in his human life. He learns about time, how it works, and the truth of Janos Audron and the beginnings of his race. Raziel's quest started as one of vengeance, but quickly became one for truth. He started to find that truth, and just when he feels he's a step ahead of his enemies, and that he's starting to see the world for what it is, all of that is lost. Kain has grown greatly as well, or at least our understanding of him has. He started this story as a villain, and is now almost an ally of Raziel himself. He has proclaimed that he wants to save Nosgoth and restore the Pillars, just through outside means. He even saves Raziel at the end of Soul Reaver 2, and unlocks some truth we have yet to see. Soul Reaver 2 builds upon its characters and lore in a great way. It expands the world of Nosgoth, the vampires, Kain, Raziel, and even introduces us to something called the Hilden, who we'll learn a lot more about in later games. I love Soul Reaver 2's story. It really adds to the lore of Legacy of Kain, which I think is its strong point. I'm not the biggest fan of the gameplay, combat, backtracking, and some of the puzzles, but the character development and world building make it a must play. But what was cut? What didn't make it into the game? Soul Reaver 2's cut content surely isn't as juicy as some of the other entries in this series, having been already made up largely of cut content itself, but it's still worth talking about. The first of the cut content were the Elemental Reavers. In the retail version of SR2, we obtain 4 elemental attunements to our Reaver: Dark, Light, Air, and Fire. But originally, there were meant to be 3 more: Water, Earth, and Spirit. Each of these 3 were planned to have their own forges as well. The attunements themselves were also supposed to be much more expansive. Each Reaver would have had 4 to 6 new abilities. The Spirit Reaver specifically would have acted as a hook shot, letting you aim at distant places in the spectral realm and teleport there. Along with additional elemental attunements, the player would have been able to obtain 7 Reaver augmentations, providing a charged up ability for each elemental Reaver. There's some evidence showing that 9 glyphs were to be included in the game. This would have mirrored the glyphs included in Soul Reaver, but each of them were supposedly based on the Pillars of Balance. This is the least covered of all the content of SR2, and most of what's known about it comes from interviews or promotional images. 2 areas were cut from the game, the first being the roofs of Ushtenheim. We visit Ushtenheim in the game, but this version of the area would have been larger, having Raziel traverse the rooftops of the town. The second deleted area was the ruins in the swamp. This would have been a village that was high in the trees that sit in the swamp. It's possible that the village would have been populated with vampires when visiting an earlier version of Nosgoth's history. There's a small amount of pre-release information stating that Raziel would have to contend with a younger version of Kain, but there's really no other evidence to this and could be a misinterpretation. Fair warning here, this game is really going to feel like a detour in the absolute onslaught of lore, character development, and story progression we've experienced so far. That's because it is, but if you're concerned about the overall story, I'd urge you not to just skip past to Defiance, because Blood Omen 2 does have some large implications for the story moving forward, though they only really pop up in the last hour of the game. Blood Omen 2 entered development during the time when Legacy of Kain's Soul Reaver was in production. It was part of Crystal Dynamics wanting to create separate and distinct series, Blood Omen and Soul Reaver. They did this to balance the expectations of Blood Omen fans and Soul Reaver fans. The team at Crystal Dynamics created a brand new engine from the ground up. The team was concerned about the weight of the rest of the series and wanted to separate Blood Omen 2 from the previous games. They did this by setting the game in a previously unexplored region of Nosgoth, to the south, giving the team the ability to create brand new environments for the game. The team also had to deal with the problem of lost abilities, Kain regaining his power, which led to the amnesia that Kain would experience in the beginning of this game. Because Blood Omen 2 and Soul Reaver 2 were developed simultaneously, the teams tried to maintain consistency between the 2 stories. It's still unclear whether the full storyline of Soul Reaver 2 with its paradoxes and timeline shifts was shared with the Blood Omen 2 development team. Blood Omen 2 takes place 400 years after the original game, and therefore moved the technologies forward as such. The team decided moving towards a steampunk Victorian Gothic aesthetic. There's some speculation that, like Soul Reaver, Blood Omen 2 started as a standalone project, but this is yet to be confirmed. Blood Omen 2's place in time and the story is kind of complicated. It takes place 400 years after the events of Blood Omen, but in a different timeline than we originally know. With the third paradox at the end of Soul Reaver 2, Kain was rushed with memories of the past. We are to assume that these are the things he remembered, showing us more of what he called the Hilden. The game starts with Kain dreaming, remembering gathering armies and starting his conquest of Nosgoth. His destruction was quickly stopped by the Seraphan Lord, a commander of the quickly rising Seraphan armies. Kain awakes in a bed, confronted by a vampire woman named Uma. She tells him that the Seraphan have enslaved humans and have been hunting down every living vampire. She also tells him that she's part of an organization called the Cabal, the Vampire Resistance. After this meeting and introduction, Uma begins to train Kain, and this is where we get our first bit of series dissonance. As Blood Omen 2's place in the timeline doesn't fit very well, its tone doesn't seem to either. It's a very odd game that seemed like it was trying to harken back to the Gothic Victorian days of Blood Omen on the PlayStation 1, but at the same time trying to be Soul Reaver in its gameplay style. Soul Reaver 2 had the great advantage of a cliffhanger, giving us the ability to retain all of Raziel's powers from the past game. Starting Blood Omen 2 as a Kain who doesn't remember any of his abilities, and after taking down the members of the Circle and making his grave decision at the Pillars, still needs to be told how to feed on a human, seems odd. I understand why the choice was made. The sequel was a great change in gameplay, and it didn't come out until 8 years after its counterpart. And obviously the lore reasons are amnesia, but I think it still just feels strange. It feels like there's a better way this could have been done, and I think weakening Kain and giving him amnesia was just a bad choice. We go through this whole tutorial section with Uma, showing us how to fight, draw blood, and introducing us to the concept of lore. In Blood Omen 2, we have a health bar and a lore bar. The more blood we take from chests or enemies, the more our lore bar goes up. Once full, this will increase our maximum health. This is another odd choice by Blood Omen 2. Uma tells us to kill everything in sight, every human, Seraphan, and criminal, and take their blood because it will make us stronger. This is one of the large challenges with going back to Blood Omen after the events of Soul Reaver 1 and 2. In the Soul Reaver series, we see Kain in an evolved form. Not only does he not even have to worry about feeding anymore as far as we can see, he is concerned with things like the fate of the universe and time itself. He has a grand plan and machinations, and now we've reverted back to this form of his that's basically a killing monster, murdering everyone in sight for his own strength. Now this is obviously a much earlier Kain, one that probably hasn't even touched the time stream yet, but it almost feels like a devolution, a backtreading in terms of the series. It's not an issue that's easily averted, and I don't really think I have a fix for it, other than don't make a Blood Omen 2 in the first place. Kain is introduced to dark gifts, of which he starts off with 2, Mist and Fury. Dark gifts are powers that vampires can be given or take. They're basically the spells and forms that we saw in Blood Omen. Mist form can make us invisible when surrounded by mist, letting us sneak up on our prey and kill them. Fury can be used only when our rage meter is increased, and can be used to deliver a powerful blow to an enemy. Uma also tells Kain that all vampires have the inherent gift of Whisper, which gives Uma the ability to speak to us through telepathy. I will say that Blood Omen 2's control scheme is a large upgrade from Soul Reaver 2, and even on PC it doesn't feel too bad. It works decently enough, and combat encounters didn't feel broken or like they didn't work. The traversal was even interesting and felt fluid. Uma and Kain are separated by a group of Seraphan warriors who attack Uma on the bridge to the lower city. Uma tells Kain he must take the path to the smuggler's den and meet her at the sanctuary, the meeting place for the Cabal. The one thing I took for granted that Soul Reaver did was its weaving of story and gameplay. In Soul Reaver, you'll play a bit of the game and eventually come across a cutscene, just like any game, but you also have Raziel's inner monologue, constantly commenting on the world around him, the enemies he sees, and what he's feeling at any given point in time. This gives us insight into Raziel himself, but also gives us a bigger view of the world. The one thing I thought when I was playing Blood Omen 2 was, why is it so quiet? I just keep killing enemies and nothing's happening. This is because Kain doesn't monologue nearly as much as Raziel. He also doesn't have the Elder God to constantly talk to, like Raziel in Soul Reaver 1. This creates a great void of information and story, which is kind of what people love Legacy of Kain for. Now you're probably saying, that's because Kain is stoic, and it's just a difference in character. That's not true though, because in Blood Omen we have vista markers. Kain would comment on every little thing in the game, giving you insight into the history of even the smallest towns and events. This creates an empty space in Blood Omen 2 and just feels like it needs more happening. This is also a precursor explanation as to why I'll be talking about gameplay a lot more in this one, rather than the story itself. Kain makes his way to the smuggler's den with the help of one of Uma's human contacts, who wants to be turned into a vampire. After we leave him, we see that another vampire is following us, and he kills this human contact. Kain makes his way through the smuggler's den and eventually finds out who was chasing him, a vampire named Faustus. We learn that Faustus used to be one of Kain's legionnaires in his vampire army. Kain laments the fact that vampires have turned on their own kind. Faustus doesn't really have much motivation other than wanting power. For this, he wants to kill Kain. This is our first boss fight, and it has multiple phases. In this first room, we fight Faustus hand-to-hand, or claw-to-claw. We have to block enough to charge our Fury gift and hit Faustus with a big blow. Once we get his health down a little bit, he'll run into another room, fitted with 4 furnaces, one on each wall. Faustus will jump to each furnace, taunting us as he throws what I believe are Molotovs. The goal here is to flip the switch at the base of the furnace and light Faustus on fire. Faustus will run away if we get too close, so we have to switch to mist form and approach the furnace so he can't see us coming. After this, Faustus will swing from the chains at the top of the room and launch a large attack at us. All we have to do here is dodge the attack and then beat Faustus while he's down. Faustus eventually dies and we take his dark gift of jump, allowing us to reach further places. Kain enters the lower city and meets back up with Uma. She tells him to head through and make his way to the sanctuary. Kain finally starts getting fed up with the orders and tells Uma that he is not her pawn. She tells him to hold out a little longer and he'll find the answers he wants. Kain makes his way through the lower city. On our way, we get Blood Omen 2's gameplay loop in full force. This is the loop that most of the areas and levels will follow from here on out. There's 3 things to do in each area, depending on which one you're in. Fight, which is just about every area, collect blood and lore, which is just about also every area, and solve puzzles, which is not every area. I've talked about combat before. It's a little tight, but this kind of changes when you meet the Seraphan warriors. The Seraphan use swords, and they have some sort of magic to charge their weapons and use more powerful attacks, and boy, do they use them. Their thrust attack cannot be blocked and will cause you to be downed for a few seconds. Blood Omen 2 has an animation problem. When you get attacked by a stronger enemy attack, it will cause you to be downed for a few seconds. Most games use this to give the enemies a chance to get some more blows in. Blood Omen 2 doesn't do this. Kain just lays there and his enemies wait for him to get up. Now, I'm not saying that the game should have enemies punishing you even more than they already are. I'm saying the animation is too long. This can happen 4 to 7 times in each area depending on the enemies, which causes a lot of downtime. But this is just static time where you're waiting for your character to get up. You can press the action button to jump up earlier, but the animation even with this is still too long. This isn't the only animation that's way too long in this game. The much more grievous and annoying version of this is the blood-sucking animation. In any given area, there can be 1 to 20 enemies. Each chapter has anywhere from 10 to 30 areas that you'll be exploring, with each being pretty linear in nature. Let's say we go into an open street area and we fight 3 Seraphan warriors, 2 criminals, and 5 pedestrians. Because remember, we're killing every human we see to get our lore and ultimately max health increased. Each time you feed on one of these downed enemies, an animation plays. The camera pans and shows Kain retrieving the blood from the body, and then pans back afterwards. This animation can be anywhere from 4 to 8 seconds depending on the enemy, as some provide more blood than others. That's 6 seconds per enemy, and in our hypothetical area of 10 enemies, that's a full minute of this same exact blood-sucking animation. If you have 10 areas in the chapter with this same amount of enemies, that's about 10 minutes of blood-sucking animations in one chapter. This isn't exact math, it's just an average, but the time spent sucking was obviously significant enough in my playthrough for me to point it out. Now you're probably saying, son, Kain sucks blood in Blood Omen a lot. Why is this any different? First of all, in Blood Omen, you aren't forced to kill every single enemy to get blood or increase your maximum blood. You could find blood refills, and sometimes you were just topped off and didn't need any. On top of that, the animation was much shorter. Now you're probably thinking, Raziel feeds on souls, and the souls take forever to get to you. Same thing, right? Wrong. In the Soul Reaver games, we kill every enemy in a room, clearing it out, and then once the fighting is done, we consume all the souls in the room at once. One animation for multiple enemies. Now how could this be fixed? Well, for one, if the developers were really attached to the idea of lore being gained from feeding, you could just make the animation shorter. That would solve most of the problem of how significant the time spent feeding is. The real way to solve this is to not have lore gained from feeding on enemies, and just have it be chests that give you lore. This would work the same way that it did in Blood Omen, where you gain health upgrades from item pickups and shrines, not from feeding. It's already implemented in the game as blood chests, it would just serve the gameplay much better to make it the primary way you receive health upgrades. Also, blood chests are cool because sometimes they go in Kain's butt instead of his mouth, and I'm gonna take that as a canon way that Kain fed after the timeline split, so please add this to the wiki. Thanks. The other thing you're doing a lot is solving puzzles. Legacy of Kain has a lot of puzzles in all of the games, some better or worse than others. Soul Reaver 1 was criticized for its block puzzles, but a lot of Blood Omen 2's puzzle issues arise from its controls. Most of the puzzles are pretty inoffensive. I will say I did like some of the puzzles that had to do with disabling guards from afar. A lot of puzzles in Blood Omen 2 revolve around glyph magic, this green energy that's pumped through the city in these golden pipes. It's used to power gates, floodlights, and much more. Sometimes we have to use switches to turn on this glyph magic and then flip a switch to open a gate. The only issue here is a lot of time can be spent standing around waiting for the glyph magic to arrive at the switch. This was an unnecessary little thing that I don't think needed to be included. The magic should have just went straight to the switch. Blood Omen 2 also doesn't allow you to move blocks sideways once you've grabbed them. Not a video game sin by any means, but it does feel like a step backwards after Soul Reaver 1 and 2. Kain makes his way through the lower city and finally meets the head of the Cabal, who turns out to be Vorador. We're not exactly sure how he's alive, and this isn't revealed to us. I believe it was intended to be revealed in Defiance or a later game, but Crystal Dynamics never got the chance to revisit this. So for now, he's just here. Kain and Vorador's meeting is interrupted by a Cabal vampire who stumbles into the room, injured. He tells them that Uma found something important on a mission in the Industrial Quarter, but was captured and taken to the Seraphan Keep for execution. Kain decides to rescue Uma and retrieve her information. He heads into the upper city where the higher levels of society live. Kain must dress as a noble to fit in, even though we're going to be slaughtering everyone in sight. As Kain makes his way through the city, he reunites with another of his old friends. Apparently Kain tried to murder Marcus, this other vampire, at some point in the past, and then requested his help when conquering Nosgoth. Marcus tells Kain that he's now working with the Seraphan. Kain vows to kill Marcus, and Marcus leaves, signifying a boss battle to come. Kain makes his way through the upper city, attempting to find the Bishop of Meridian who can help him get into the Seraphan Keep. When he finds the Bishop, he is being mind-controlled by Marcus, which begins our second boss battle. Marcus's boss battle has a little less mechanics than our skirmish with Faustus. Marcus is using his powers of telepathy, but we can stun him by ringing the bells of the chapel that we are in. This gives us the chance to get a 3-hit combo off on him. We do this until Marcus is down to about half health, and then some Seraphan priests enter to mess up our plan. They stop the bells from working, and Marcus starts hiding in the shadows of the chapel. Here we have to kill some Seraphan priests, but ultimately kill Marcus himself by just finding where he's hiding and hitting him. We gain Marcus's ability to mind control, and with the Bishop in tow, we head to the Seraphan Keep. I don't actually mind the Seraphan Keep level. It's a large stronghold with a Gothic temple feel rather than this Victorian steampunk that we've been exposed to in the surrounding city of Meridian. Kain makes his way through the stronghold and finds Uma in her cell. Before he can rescue her, the Seraphan Lord shows up and confronts him. Kain tries to attack the Seraphan Lord but finds out that he is too powerful, and Uma tells him that they must run. Kain also sees that the Seraphan Lord has the Soul Reaver, stolen from Kain during their first battle. Before they're teleported away, Kain vows to kill the Seraphan Lord for vanquishing him last time. Uma and Kain end up back in the Cabal Sanctuary, and Uma tells Vorador her important information. She reveals that the Seraphan have found something called the Nexus Stone, a powerful device that can bend time and space and teleport the user anywhere in Nosgoth. Kain learns that it can negate the power of the Soul Reaver, and this spurs him to head off for it. Kain heads to the Industrial Quarter to look for the Nexus Stone, and we're again back in places that look like they aren't part of Nosgoth at all. It's hard not to point out the great dissonance between this game and the Soul Reaver series. You could have said the same thing before with Blood Omen and Soul Reaver, but at least then there was the excuse of two separate developers and visions. Also, Blood Omen has the benefit of Soul Reaver 2, which acted as a tie between both series, bringing the lore from each and melding the worlds in a much more satisfactory way. Blood Omen 2 doesn't have that luxury and remains an out-of-place enigma in the Legacy of Kain series. Did you ever think you'd hear Vorador say, "Take the subway"?
So be it. You must use the subway to reach the Industrial Quarter, which lies in the northeastern part of the city.
Kain finds the Nexus Stone, with another of his vampire friends, Sebastian, guarding it. Our third boss fight is a little annoying, but there's some interesting mechanics here. Sebastian rarely attacks you directly. The two of you are in a steam room and you have to grab him and throw him into the steam to damage him. In Phase 2, you have to trap him in the center electricity when he lunges at you. Finally, the dais is raised and Sebastian will climb on top of it or jump down to avoid you. Here we have to charm the dais operator and turn on the steam vents to the sides. When Sebastian jumps up, we have to grab him and toss him down a couple of times. Sebastian dies and we retrieve the Nexus Stone. Before he dies, he tells Kain that there's a secret underground machine of vampire technology that the Seraphan Lord is using. With the Nexus Stone gone, the factory begins to explode, and luckily, a Cabal vampire retrieves Kain from the wreckage, taking him back to the sanctuary. Vorador tells Kain to find the Seer, a woman that owes him a favor. She may be able to tell him the location of the device he's looking for. He also tells Kain that she's outside of the city and that strange demons roam the lands outside of Meridian. Kain makes his way through the canyons, fighting demons, criminals, and Seraphan along the way. He finally finds the Seer, an old vampire woman who is hiding out in a shack. She seems to be old anyways because she still has wings. She tells Kain that she knows where the device is, but that he'll need her gift to access it, and he must drink her blood to get it. Just then, the Seraphan Lord shows up and starts burning the shack down. Kain accepts the gift, and the Seer transports him to the device, with her left inside, supposedly burning with the shack itself. Kain shows up at the device and uses his newfound telekinesis to open the gate. Inside, he finds a monstrous being who seems to know Kain and is being used to power the device. Kain speaks with him, and the beast tells him that the only one that can destroy the device is the one who built it. The one who built it was part of an old race that existed on Nosgoth aeons ago. He tells Kain of a place far to the north of Nosgoth called the Eternal Prison. This is where the builder is now. With that, Kain heads through a tunnel to the Eternal Prison. Since we just got telekinesis, one thing I want to talk about is dark gifts. It's one of the few things about Blood Omen 2 that I actually like. I think that they're all unique and interesting enough to warrant their appearance in the game. Berserk and Fury both have their place in combat, one being a weaker version of the two but costing less of our rage bar. Jump allows us to access further places and just feels like it works really well. Mist form is interesting and I feel like is used sparingly, but its place in puzzles and combat make it fun to use. Charm is interesting as well and shows up in combat and boss battles alike. I think Charm would be a lot more interesting if it could be used before battle as well, taking control of an enemy to start killing within their ranks and thin the herd before you go into battle yourself, but that might be too much to ask. I think the dark gifts are a great way to pare down the sheer amount of spells, items, and forms that Kain had access to in Blood Omen 1, and it's really one of the systems that this game does well in my opinion. Kain travels to the Eternal Prison. This level is one of my favorites in the game. We're far away from the streets of Meridian and deep inside of an ancient temple prison. This feels more in line of what we've come to expect from this series so far. You can hear the tortured screams of prisoners, and hellish beasts assail you at every corner. Ah, Home. In all seriousness, the Eternal Prison chapter is interesting. Using the telekinesis ability to full effect here, the puzzles are just complex enough to be fun, but not too complex as to be confusing. Kain is assailed by the wardens of the prison who tell him he doesn't belong there. He of course ignores this warning and continues on. This leads to the wardens attacking him and teleporting him to different areas of the prison, trying to trap him. Kain finds a portal and is sent to some strange nether realm and faces off against various wraith beings. As he makes his way deeper in the prison, he finally finds the Builder. This man tells him that he is of an ancient elder race, and the device was created to wipe out all other races on Nosgoth. It was never finished and could only be powered by a vast network of energy. Glyph energy? He tells us the only way to destroy it would be to destroy the ancient creature that resides at the depths of the device, and the only way this eternal creature can be destroyed is with the blood of this elder race. Killing two birds with one stone, Kain puts the Builder out of his misery and takes his blood. With this, Kain destroys the prison and makes his escape, but not before this deranged prisoner chases after him. He stops him at every turn, dunking him in water on multiple occasions, until we have our fourth boss battle. This deranged lunatic uses a gift called Immolate, which we'll obviously gain later, to one-hit kill us if he catches us in his gaze. We have to hide behind statues and push him off his perch when we have the chance. The second phase of the battle involves us baiting him to destroy these statue weapons, and then use the telekinesis symbols that appear to reverse the destruction of the large statue in the center. We then bait the lunatic into attacking the statue, dropping it on him and winning the battle. Before the boss dies, he reveals himself as Kain's greatest warrior, Magnus. Kain belies him as a traitor, turning him to the Seraphan at the last moments of battle, and puts him out of his misery by taking his dark gift. With that, Kain heads back to the device and speaks with the Beast, who tells him that the ancient race that created the device is called the Hilden. It's all coming together now. We put two and two together and realize that they were the ones warring with the vampires ages ago. The Beast also tells Kain that the leader of the Hilden is the Seraphan Lord himself, destroying vampires under a new guise. He also tells Kain that the Hilden were banished from the material plane long ago. Kain heads down through the device and makes his way to the center, finding the eternal being, the Mass, that lies within. He uses his blood to destroy it and makes his way back to the top of the device. When he arrives, the beast that he saw there before is no longer. He is changed. He reveals himself to be Janos Audrin. Janos tells Kain of their past and how their race was once great and divine. He tells Kain of the Hilden vampire wars of long ago, and how they banished the Hilden from the face of the earth to their own plane. The Seraphan Lord opened a gate to the material realm, and he is bringing others through to marshal an army and take back Nosgoth. Kain's new mission is to destroy the Hilden Gate, thus destroying the Hilden on Nosgoth. Kain and Janos head back to the sanctuary, and Vorador is surprised to see Janos. Janos tells Vorador that his story of resurrection is for another time. They develop a plan to journey to the Hilden city and close the gate, but they need to bring the barriers surrounding it down first. Kain and Uma head to the wharves to try and find a ship to the Hilden city. Before they can enter the docks, Uma steals the Nexus Stone from Kain, telling him that she knows he'll betray the Cabal once the Seraphan Lord is defeated. Later in the wharves, Kain finds Uma cornered and saves her before she can be cut down. She was still mortally wounded and asks Kain to give her his blood to save her.
Yes, Kain. I thought you were to bring the Seraphan Lord to his knees.
I thought...
I know.
It seems... I was wrong. I could not carry the fight alone.
You were brave to try.
Kain, I'm dying.
Yes, you are.
I need your blood. Please, you can save me.
I know. Tell me, child, do you see me ruling Nosgoth?
Yes, I see it now.
And do you believe that Nosgoth rightly belongs to me?
I do. I believe it, Kain. Please.
Then you may die, knowing the truth.
No!
Kain cuts her throat and says that she could have been his queen. She dies at his feet. Kain makes it to a ship and heads for the Hilden City. At the gates of the city, the Seraphan commander confronts Kain, telling him that his efforts are futile. He tries to kill Kain, but realizes that he holds the Nexus Stone. This does not dissuade him, as he says that the Hilden Gate is still open, and Nosgoth will be theirs for the taking. Kain shuts down the magic that powers the city's shields, and is connected to Vorador and Janos, who say they are on their way. The two teleport into the city, and Vorador wonders where Uma is. Kain tells him that he killed her after her betrayal. Vorador is shocked and says he was wrong to trust Kain. Janos tells the two that they have bigger things to worry about, and the Seraphan Lord shows up and attacks Janos and Vorador. Janos stays to tend to Vorador and teleports Kain to the Hilden Gate. Kain finds the Hilden Gate, and of course, the Seraphan Lord with it. He tells Kain that he is the better lord, and the humans and vampires will continue to bend their knee to him. His cause is just, and Kain's is not. Them's fightin' words, and it's time for our final boss battle. The Seraphan Lord shoots energy blasts from the Soul Reaver, and we can't get too close or he'll teleport away, so we have to hit him with telekinesis, and then jump attack him off the ledge. He appears again, and we drop the Nexus Stone into the Hilden Gate. Now the Lord is attacking us head-on. We have to build up a rage bar and hit him with Immolate. He drops the Soul Reaver, and Janos shows up to help us. The Seraphan Lord, I'm still calling him that even though he's a Hilden, expresses his disgust at Janos and explains that this is justice for the vampires banishing him and his race. He begins beating on Janos, and Kain grabs the Soul Reaver, but not before the Seraphan Lord tosses Janos into the gate, thus banishing him to the demon realm. That gate begins to close, and the platforms explode around the two. We finish the Seraphan Lord off with the Soul Reaver. With his dying breath, he tells Kain that the Hilden are immortal, and they will return. Kain tells him that he'll be waiting for their kind when they do, and stabs the Seraphan Lord through the chest, killing him. Kain walks outside of the Hilden City and reminisces on Uma while he watches the city burn. He walks away from the explosion because he's a cool guy, and vows to begin his conquest of Nosgoth again. Blood Omen 2 certainly has its flaws, of which I think I've covered in great extent here. In its third act, the story starts to become more interesting, and its purpose in the overarching story of Legacy of Kain is there. Its significance just isn't that great. We did learn a lot about the Hilden, and that will come back up in Defiance. I know I spent a lot of time shitting on this game, but one thing I really did love about it was its size. Each chapter felt enormous, and the areas themselves were huge. You can tell that a lot of work went into this game, so I praise it for that alone. The way I see Blood Omen 2 is not like Soul Reaver 2, it's like Soul Reaver 1. Even though this was the second in its own series running parallel with Soul Reaver in its releases, Blood Omen wasn't a proper enough introduction for Crystal Dynamics. This game created a new introduction to Kain, and I think given a sequel, it would have given this team proper time to explore what they were trying to in Blood Omen 2. There were some interesting ideas, some of them executed well and some executed poorly. Overall, most of the game just felt so far from what Crystal Dynamics were already building up in Soul Reaver 1 and 2 that it just doesn't feel right. There's not a lot of cut content from Blood Omen 2. A few areas are missing from the retail game in the Lower City, the Eternal Prison, the Wharves, and the Hilden City. Really not much is known about these areas, and some of them may not have even survived the concept stage. The icons for each of the Dark Gifts were changed a bit before release as well, but it's not anything too notable. Some of the Dark Gifts themselves were changed pre-release, as Berserk was originally Speed, which would give Kain the ability to move incredibly fast like Sebastian does in his boss fight. I'm assuming this was changed because it would have been very unbalanced and made the player much too powerful. There's also an early version of the game that includes a much heavier basis on stealth. You can see remnants of this in the retail version with Mist Form. These small sections act as stealth moments, but aren't really fleshed out all that much. I can easily see how this game could have become Kain sneaking around Meridian, trying not to get caught by the Seraphan. I'm gonna be honest, I don't have much in the way of development information on Defiance, primarily because there just isn't a lot of information out there. There isn't really a ton of information out there on Defiance in general. I'll talk about why I think that is at the end, but for now, let's get into the game. I was pretty excited to get into Defiance because I had never really played it when I was younger. Plus, I wanted some more time-streaming, world-ending, eldritch Nosgoth to wash the taste out of my mouth after Blood Omen 2. Defiance opens slightly recapping the events of Soul Reaver, showing us the cinematic from the first game, with Kain's voiceover talking about his choices.
But does one ever truly have a choice? One can only match, move by move, the machinations of fate.
Kain is infiltrating the Seraphan stronghold, trying to kill Mobius. He overhears some guards talking about killing vampires, and we're given control. As I'm sure a lot of you know, one choice can make or break a game. Be it a small one or a large one, someone standing up in a development meeting and saying, "I think that we should have a fixed camera," can make or break a game. Well, that's probably exactly what happened with Defiance. I was jarred as soon as I started the game. The odd thing is, I know exactly why this decision was made. Looking back at Soul Reaver 2, the entire genesis of the game was the vision of a cinematic experience, and that comes through entirely in that entry. So the idea to include a camera that stays stationary and moves when you travel to different rooms could make a lot of sense when wanting to create an even more epic and cinematic experience than you already had. This is a great idea in premise, but its execution is incredibly poor. So much so that the camera in Defiance has become somewhat of a meme at this point in the LoK community. By the way, I don't know if it's exactly called a fixed camera, but that's how I'm going to refer to it, so you can stop writing your comments correcting me if I'm wrong. It's not only that this camera is annoying, I think it actually detracts from the world of the game. Some of the most amazing moments from the LoK series have been just looking around at the grand places you're in. You can't really do that in Defiance. You have to trust that the developers are showing you everything that you need to see. There's also a lot that's hidden behind the camera. You have to kind of run into it in these really weird, awkward ways sometimes to find secrets. There's even a moment in the tutorial with Kain where the game is teaching you to feed from these urns that are stashed around various areas, and the urn is off-screen, under the camera, out of your view. And God forbid you get into a battle on the precipice of a doorway. It's something that I eventually kind of got used to a couple chapters into the game, but there were always moments when I dreaded having to jump across platforms. It's a bad sign when a player sees a jumping puzzle you've laid out before them and they think, "Man, I hope the camera in this game doesn't prevent me from completing this." The real problem with Defiance is that everything else is pretty amazing. It's sad to say, but the combat, puzzles, collectibles, and story are on such an even kilter with each other, and if it weren't for the camera, this would be easily one of the best games in the series. I can't say this game isn't cinematic though, because it is. The opening looks exactly like an LoK movie, and a lot of the gameplay does as well. Watching it looks pretty cool, playing it isn't as cool. Kain infiltrates the Seraphan stronghold looking for Mobius. To do this, he must find different talismans and artifacts to open doors in the fortress. He finds Mobius first underground, speaking with his masters. Kain confronts Mobius, who easily shrugs him off and tells Kain that he's not this omniscient presence that he thinks he is.
How humiliating it must be for you to come begging at my doorstep for answers.
Enough wordplay.
Don't threaten me. You see, I have the upper hand. How remarkable that the great Kain should succumb to the scepter's power like any common vampire.
Kain continues through the stronghold, finding Mobius's tower. He confronts the sorcerer again, pinning him against a wall, trying to get his answers of how to free Raziel. Mobius tells Kain that he shouldn't free Raziel yet, as he still must complete his destiny. By saving Raziel, Kain has doomed himself, because Raziel's destiny is still to kill Kain. Kain needs to find the other pieces of the balance emblem, for some reason we're not sure of yet. Kain makes his way to the pillars, hoping to find his answers there. Raziel wakes up in the underworld being chastised and tortured by the Elder God. The Elder God wants Raziel to pledge fealty to him and become his loyal servant once again. Raziel eventually does so, knowing that it's his only possible way out of the spectral realm. He does the Elder God's bidding and consumes some souls. Eventually, he finds his way out of the underworld and into the surrounding cemetery, securing an alternative method to switch to the material plane. He comes across some vampire hunters, overhearing their conversation about a ghost at the Pillars. With this, he realizes he's been in the spectral realm for 500 years, which means he's woken up around the time of Blood Omen. Raziel finds the gates out of the cemetery, which lead towards the Pillars of Nosgoth, but he needs a dark attunement and a light attunement to his Reaver to activate it, which he doesn't have yet. This is one of the annoying things about Defiance, is it reintroduces forges. Reusing the forge idea isn't that bad of a concept, but the game also makes us re-attune our Reaver to dark, light, fire, and air, which should have already been attuned from Soul Reaver 2. I'm sure there's some lore reason for this. Maybe when Kain pulled the sword out of Raziel, he was so weakened that he lost all Reaver upgrades, or maybe being in the spectral realm for 500 years caused them to fade. These aren't the same forges from Soul Reaver 2 though, they're a little different. These forges are definitely a little watered down compared to the ones in Soul Reaver 2. Each forge has a temporal thing in the middle that you use to upgrade your Reaver. You usually have to defeat some mini-bosses to fill it, and then attune your Reaver and get out by solving a couple puzzles with said attunement. Raziel attunes his blade to the dark and light again, but finds murals in each ruin that show him what he had already seen in the last game, a great war between the vampires and an elder race. The vampires created the Pillars to defeat them, and then were cursed with blood hunger. With both attunements gained, Raziel heads for the cemetery exit. Raziel exits the gate and heads towards the Pillars. The Pillars in this game are often seen from far away, which I love. We've mostly seen the Pillars up close until now, and seeing them off in this distance, extending infinitely into the sky, is just amazing. It provides a grandiosity to this world that can't be rivaled. Kain finds his way to the Pillars, following Mobius's advice to head west of them, that his answers would be there. Here he finds another piece of the balance emblem and another interesting puzzle. Kain ponders if Mobius is tricking him, leading astray from his path again. Eventually he finds a symbol and reveals a hidden set of vampire ruins off in the distance. I'm not going to talk about the camera any more than I already have, but I'm just going to show you some footage of me as Kain in this sequence to illustrate how frustrating it can be. Raziel is hot on Kain's tail, showing up right after him only 500 years later. I really think this concept of playing both characters separated by aeons is a really good idea. It gets you to explore each area slightly different, having been dilapidated by hundreds of years of war and ruin. Each area is slightly changed, but things are open to Raziel that are not to Kain, such as forges. It also gives me the vibe of two best friends trying to find each other 500 years apart. I almost wish there was a musical sequence at the Pillars where Raziel and Kain sing the same lonesome song, 500 years apart, brushing up against the same pillar. Are you looking at the same balance pillar that I am, Kain? Raziel shows up and opens the Fire Forge, discovering a mural inside that shows him the man responsible for forging the Soul Reaver, Vorador. He gains the fire attunement and fights two specters of the Guardians, the Nature Guardian and the Conflict Guardian. He leaves the forge, gaining access to the Pillars. Raziel finds the Pillars corrupted and Ariel haunting them. Ariel ironically tells Raziel that she has no time for riddles, even though that's like her whole thing. This is pre-Kain's decision, Ariel, and she still believes that Kain will help her. She also tells Raziel that his kind's name is unspoken, and that they will be wiped from this earth. I think she believes that Raziel is a Hilden, because she still doesn't know Raziel yet. Raziel asks where he can find Vorador, and she points the way to his fortress in the Black Forest. Kain has made his way into the Vampire Citadel, and finds the final piece of the Balance token. Inside, he also finds murals depicting a final battle between the champion of the vampires and the champion of the adversaries. He's not sure how to interpret this, as he thinks his destiny may be to die. Raziel finds Vorador's mansion in the forest and finds it filled with a myriad of riddles and puzzles. The main puzzle we have to solve is that of the 3 gargoyles in the center fountain room. They're spouting water and blocking our entrance to the water forge. To get them to stop, we have to find 3 spears hidden around the mansion and impale the gargoyles with them. These gargoyles act as symbolic effigies to the vampire's adversaries, the Hilden. Once Raziel does this, he enters the water forge and finds a similar mural to the one Kain found in the vampire citadel. It shows the 2 champions battling, and Raziel wonders if Kain was the vampire champion all along, destined to kill him. Raziel defeats the 2 guardians at the center of the water forge and gains the water attunement. This gives us the ability to freeze waterfalls and extinguish flames. With this, we have the ability to open Vorador's crypt, where Raziel hopes he'll be waiting. He is, and he speaks with Raziel about his fate. Raziel gets frustrated because Vorador thinks that Raziel has chosen his fate, but Raziel has chosen nothing, always being manipulated by others. Vorador shows Raziel that he has the body of Janos Audron, his heart still ripped from his chest. Because the humans have the Heart of Darkness and it's still alive, Janos has not begun to decay. Vorador tells Raziel that he must go retrieve the Heart of Darkness where it's being held in Avernus Cathedral, then bring it back to Vorador and try to wake the ancient vampire. Raziel agrees and heads on his way. Let's talk about jumps, shall we? Legacy of Kain is an action-adventure game with a healthy mix of platforming in each entry. This is totally fine, and in a lot of the games it works really well. Jumping across pillars or platforms is almost a staple to the series itself. This becomes a lot more complex with a wonky fixed camera, and Vorador's mansion has this on display like no other. There are 3 jumps in this chapter that made me want to pull my hair out. First, this jump outside of the mansion where you have to land on this pillar, spectral shift, then jump across. First of all, it would glitch and push me off the pillar while spectral shifting. Second, the camera is at such an angle that doesn't tell me how far this next pillar is, making this jump incredibly difficult. On top of that, if you fall, you have to walk all the way to the building, climb up, and then spectral shift to try it again. This one's pretty bad, but the next 2 dwarf it in comparison. The first one is this small pillar jump. You climb this pillar, hop onto the surrounding ones, jump across, and then jump in this window. It's quite annoying, but nothing too crazy. We'll come back to why this one infuriated me in a second. This last one has you jump up across these 2 pillars at this incredibly weird angle so that you can't even see the top of the pillar or how far away it is from you. This jump is annoying, sure, but there's fog of death below you, so if you die, you just retry it right away. Only this changes near the end of the chapter. At the end, Vorador gives you the library seal so that you can exit the mansion and head for Avernus Cathedral. You have to redo these 2 jumps to get to the library, only this time, there's no fog of death. You drop down into the foyer and have to walk all the way from the foyer into the fountain room, back outside, and redo the pillar jump again, just to try the foyer jump. It's incredibly tedious and frustrating. This game is just full of jumps that make no sense, and they're not intuitive. Half the time, I just kind of had to jump and glide, hoping that along the way I'd see something and be able to land. That worked most of the time, but when it didn't, it meant repeating things over and over again until it was right. Most of my playtime was spent trying to figure out particularly annoying sets of jumps just to progress. We're done with Vorador's mansion though, and it's by far the most egregious display of this in the entire game. So now we can continue on back to Kain at the Vampire Citadel. Kain ventures through portals in the Citadel, entering the different Reaver forges Raziel would find himself in. He sees more murals of Nosgoth's history and finds that the vampires had eventually elected human guardians for the pillars. They would turn the humans when they came of age, but one day the humans rebelled. Kain sees an image of Mobius and Mortanius leading these rebellions, sowing dissent even back then. Kain then sees 2 murals depicting this final battle between the vampire and Hilden champion. but they both depict different outcomes, one with the vampire champion being victorious, and the other with the Hilden coming out on top. Kain wonders which one is meant to be true. Inside the forges, he finds the final piece of the balance token, and makes his way back to the Citadel. Inside the chamber at the center of the Citadel, he finds a pool with a nameless voice speaking to him, that of the Elder God.
I have delivered you faithfully to the very hour you desire. You know what must be done, Kain.
The Elder God tells him what Raziel is doing, heading to Avernus Cathedral to find the Heart of Darkness and revive Janos Audrin. Kain realizes this is a great mistake and wants to stop him, but Raziel is 500 years in the future. The Elder God offers to help him, and even though Kain doesn't trust him, he has no other choice. The Elder God transports Kain to the future, and Kain heads to Avernus Cathedral. Raziel is just arriving and is swarmed by cult sorcerers who are summoning the same demons we saw here in Blood Omen. Raziel immediately finds the Earth Forge and fights the final two spectral guardians, Time and Energy. He gains the Earth Attunement, which can be used to summon platforms and also make Raziel heavier in water. When back in the cathedral, he opens a portal to an underground passageway. Raziel finds murals in this passageway that depict a different story than the ones he had seen before. These were from the perspective of the Hilden. It showed a story of the Hilden rising in rebellion against the vampire's god, not wanting to submit to the wheel of fate. Raziel sees other depictions of the Hilden hero and starts to think this may be him. In the depths of the underground, Raziel finds a cult worshipping a god called Hashagik. They are delivering blood sacrifices to him, and Raziel falls in the pit, coming face to face with this god himself. He finds out that this god is Turel, a deformed version of his vampire brother from ages in the future. He tells Raziel that he was summoned there and he is trapped. He's quickly possessed by something we're assuming is a Hilden and attacks Raziel. This is the first real boss fight in the game, as I don't really consider the Spectral Guardians boss fights. They have health bars, sure, but they go down so fast and aren't really a challenge. Turel attacks us with energy balls and shockwaves. He also has a sonic blast that we can make use of, hitting a gong when he uses it to shock his ears and make him vulnerable. After doing this enough, we can hit all the gongs and he'll die. Before he dies, he tells us to destroy the binding so they can all be free. We're not sure if this is the Hilden speaking or Turel himself, but we pull his spirit and he gives us empowered TK blasts, which we use to break a pillar securing our exit from the cathedral. This whole boss battle wasn't bad. I like using the environment to defeat bosses, and it harkens back to Soul Reaver, but there's a reason for that. Turel was originally supposed to appear in Soul Reaver, but was part of the cut content that we talked about before. I think slapping him in here was, one, a way to reuse that idea, but also to tie up the loose end of why he wasn't in the original game. Raziel finds Mortanius, who is the leader of this cult. Mortanius is also being possessed by the Hilden, but seems to know who Raziel is. The Hilden tell Raziel that they will prevail no matter what. We learn that they were the ones trying to corrupt the Circle from within, as to break the binding that seals them from this world. Raziel asks Mortanius where the Heart of Darkness is. Mortanius tells Raziel that he created the Scion of Balance with the Heart of Darkness to save Nosgoth. Raziel realizes what this means, that Mortanius revived Kain with the Heart of Darkness to try and keep the Hilden from entering Nosgoth. The heart that he seeks is inside Kain. With this, Mortanius teleports away. Kain arrives at the Avernus Cathedral, and Raziel appears from the portal. Raziel is vengeful against Kain, and now paranoid that he's going to kill him.
You must trust me, Raziel. Our intentions, for Nosgoth, for our futures, are not so diverse.
I must trust you. Or...
I've not come here to threaten you, Raziel.
You say that while you hold in your hand the instrument of my doom?
Kain is armed with the Soul Reaver, the only thing that can kill Raziel truly, and the only thing that can kill Kain is the Wraithblade. Kain tells Raziel that Janos must not be resurrected, and that the two of them can still choose the third option. Kain tells Raziel that he is the only one in this world that has free will. He has the choice to make his own destiny. He's not bound by the Wheel of Fate because of his rebirth. Raziel's eyes are glowing green, inferring that he may be possessed by the Hilden Lord. Raziel is so focused on this prophesied battle, so concerned with destiny. He is paranoid and vengeful, enraged that he feels he's been played with and isn't sure who to trust. He lashes out and we battle Raziel as Kain. This battle was kind of difficult. Raziel is a tough opponent. He comes at you with all his power, shooting us with TK blasts, attacking us with the Reaver. He's strong, but with enough dodging and capitalization on weaknesses, we take him down. Kain again makes it clear that he doesn't want to fight Raziel, but he's persistent, his eyes now flaming green. They go to battle again, but this time as Raziel. This boss battle is similar to the last, albeit a little easier. We dodge Kain's attacks and capitalize on his openings. It's also playing the Soul Reaver theme in the background, which is only fitting. The music from the journey that began these two to now play them out. I really like this idea of playing this battle from both sides. It shows that at this point in the game, we have no idea who our actual protagonist is. Somehow these two allies who were trying to break the wheel of fate have become enemies. Just from the twisting of prophecies and outside words, they've turned against each other, or at least one of them has. Raziel grabs Kain and something starts leaching out to him. Raziel starts to fade, but Kain tells him that he doesn't want to hurt him.
No, Raziel. Ve Victus. I didn't. Woe to the conquered. I have found the heart of darkness, and you go to oblivion.
Raziel turns Kain's own words against him, saying Ve Victus before he rips his heart from his chest, then blasts him into the portal from where he just came. The green flames fade from Raziel's eyes, and he realizes that he doesn't feel any sense of victory, just that they may have walked blindly into their enemy's trap. He also isn't sure whether Kain actually wanted to hurt him or not, only that now he would never know. At this point in the story, Raziel is paranoid. He's acting vengefully towards everyone. Understandably so, he's been manipulated, used as a pawn, and played in other people's machinations ever since he was pulled from the abyss. He's not sure who to trust, what prophecies and histories are true, and who is on his side. In Raziel's mind at this point, he doesn't have a side. He's just looking for answers. Raziel heads back to Vorador's mansion. Oh, great. And finds that Mobius has taken control of it. This is the same time where Mobius takes Vorador and publicly executes him. His militia have stormed the building and blown doorways, making our exits very different. Luckily, there's no terrible jump puzzles for us to solve this time, and Raziel heads to the sanctuary. There, he places the Heart of Darkness in Janos' chest, reviving the centuries-old vampire. Janos wonders where he is, and Raziel tells him that it's been 5 centuries.
Your murderers are long dead. 500 years. And Vorador, also dead. Your bloodline is erased. The age of the vampires is coming to an end.
This meeting is very different than their last, with Raziel being annoyed and vengeful. He tells Janos that he didn't revive him out of benevolence, but just for answers. He reveals to the revived vampire of what he knows, that the Soul Reaver is his undoing, and shows him the Wraithblade. This shocks Janos, realizing that he may have been reading the prophecies wrong all along. He realizes that Raziel's destiny is complex and promises to show him his answers, teleporting the two of them to the vampire citadel. Janos tells Raziel that the curse of bloodthirst the vampires received from the Hilden was not just that, but a curse of immortality. This curse forever ensured that vampires could not purify themselves through death, that they would not be able to die and become part of the wheel. He explains that for the binding of the pillars to be preserved, they had to pass their curse onto the human successors. This is the price they pay for the binding. The dilemma of the vampire is that while the humans control the pillars, they are corrupted, giving the Hilden a chance to come back into the world. Janos tells Raziel that he is the fulcrum of their destiny, and that he must journey into the innermost sanctum of the Citadel to find the answers he seeks. Raziel finds this chamber, and inside he is met again with the Elder God, who is blocking access to a particular font of energy. This puzzle is really cool, and the camera decides to stay out of the way for most of it. We have to slash the Elder God's tentacles, revealing the font, and then jump back up to charge different batteries connected to different Reaver attunements. Each time we do this, the platform gets lower, and we have to use different powers to get back up. At first, it's just summoning earth platforms to make our way, but eventually we have to freeze a waterfall and jump platform to platform, all before the Elder God can wrap his tendrils around the font again. When the batteries are charged and the font is open, we find Ariel at the center. She purifies the Reaver, telling Raziel that this will restore balance. Raziel releases the Balance Guardian spirits and gains the Spirit Reaver. He's left with more questions than answers at this point and heads back to find Janos, who is looking out at the pillars. This very moment is the same moment that Kain is making his fateful decision.
He doomed the pillars to eternal ruin.
Raziel, there may yet be hope. There is one who will be called. You must seek the Scion of Balance. Dear God! Raziel, we meet again.
Janos witnesses the breaking of the pillars, and with the binding undone, the Hilden Lord possesses him. The Hilden Lord tells Raziel that he was his pawn all along, and that every event up until now, he's been tricked to put Janos here, and to give the Hilden the vessel they needed, Janos. Janos, struggling against the corruption, tells Raziel to kill him before the Hilden Lord can do too much damage, but Raziel is not quick enough. This boss battle is a bit difficult, as it should be. We're fighting the Hilden Lord, who is possessing the body of possibly the most powerful vampire to ever live. Janos will fly up in the air and swoop down at us. The only way to hit him is to catch him off guard. We have to dodge his attacks and wait for an opportunity. If we attack him when he's ready, he'll do a spinning attack that takes a lot of health. While I much prefer the environmental boss battles, this one felt great. It was challenging, and it required me to learn the mechanics while also having great precision in my movements. We beat Janos, but don't kill him in time, and he rises up, killing Raziel and sending him to the Spectral Realm, where he comes face to face with the Elder God again. Raziel's angry, slashing at the Elder God, but doing nothing. The Elder God tells him that his destiny has been fulfilled, and that there's no use for him anymore. He tells him every move has been one that has been planned by the Elder God. Raziel will be his prisoner for eternity, as his soul cannot be returned to the Wheel of Fate. The Elder God calls his servant Mobius to this chamber, and we're switched back to Kain. Kain is alive and awakens in the demon realm of the Hilden. He doesn't understand how he still lives. He defeats these demons and makes his way back to the cathedral. Kain feels compelled to the vampire citadel and heads there immediately. He looks out, seeing the pillars broken, realizing that this was the moment of his choice. He wonders if these choices made any difference. Maybe he had missed his final cast at destiny. He finds the innermost chamber and sees Mobius talking to the Elder God. His staff doesn't work on Kain's Reaver, realizing that the heart was the part of Kain that the staff affected. Mobius debates for his life, begging for mercy, but Kain impales him on the Reaver. Mobius uses his last breath to tell him that this doesn't matter, as he serves the Elder God, who has the power over life and death. Mobius appears in the Spectral Realm, where Raziel sees him and impales him with the Wraith Blade, returning his soul to the Wheel of Fate. The Elder God tells him that his actions are irrelevant and that Mobius had run his course. Raziel reflects on all the souls wandering around him. He sees the third option, the way to end this.
But I was armed with newfound knowledge, and it burned within me.
Redeemer and Destroyer.
Mobius had never seen his master until the Soul Reaver purified his sight. Even the ancient vampires had no idea what it was they so righteously worshipped.
You must unite what has been set asunder.
All the conflict and strife throughout history all the fear and hatred served but one purpose: to keep my master's wheel turning. All souls were prisoners, trapped in the pointless round of existence, leading distracted, blunted lives until death returned them, always in ignorance, to the wheel.
The coin is still turning.
But what hope had there been? One cannot fight the unseen.
Only then will the Scion of Balance be armed for his true endeavor.
Despair, Raziel. There is no escape.
It was then I knew what I had to do. I alone could end this.
Kain, do you so enjoy death?
Yes.
Raziel.
No! Yes, this is how...
No! Raziel!
The Soul Reaver, pure of all corruption. This is what it is for. This is what I am for. The two become one. Both Soul Reavers together. And the Scion of Balance is healed. And I am not your enemy, not your destroyer. I am, as before, your right hand.
He shifts to the material realm, inhabiting Mobius's body. Without realizing, Kain impales Mobius's body, impaling Raziel's spirit in turn. Raziel realizes his destiny, that the Scion of Balance will be healed with this action. He tells Kain he's not his enemy, but his sword, his right hand. Raziel dies and becomes part of the Soul Reaver. With this, Kain is revealed the true enemy, the Elder God. Kain ponders casting Raziel into the abyss with this monstrous beast, feeling some sort of remorse for his actions. This is our final boss battle, the Elder God. We have to slash his tentacles to take down his shield and then rush over to him to do some damage. Eventually he'll start blasting us with some energy and we continue the same strategy until he's done. Kain drops the chamber on top of the Elder God while he tells him that he will return and that this isn't the last of him.
Now at last, the masks had fallen away. The strings of the puppets had become visible, and the hands of the Prime Mover exposed. Most ironic of all was the last gift that Raziel had given me. More powerful than the sword that now held his soul, more acute even than the vision his sacrifice had accorded me. The first bitter taste of that terrible illusion. Hope.
This final cinematic shows that Kain is changed. Raziel affected him. He had become embittered with the thoughts of destiny. His fatalism had led him to believe that nothing could be changed, until he realized it could. With Raziel to help him, he realized that the world could be saved. No matter how hard the Wheel of Fate churned, there was always a third option. Raziel's story itself has come full circle. Spending the story raging against his destiny, he finally realized it was to become one with the sword. In this way, he would help Kain moving forward, help Nosgoth be saved, by becoming the Blade. He had to sacrifice his life to do this, and he was the only one that could, because not only was he reborn for the job, he had the free will to do so. Unfortunately, we would never see that happen. I'd like to imagine that the sequel to Defiance would see us playing as Kain, with Raziel living in the sword, being our benefactor, as the Elder God had been in the first game. Before we get to the future of the series and what path it went down after this, let's talk about Defiance's cut content. A lot of Defiance's content was already scraps that had been cut from the other games. The additional attunements to the Reaver had been planned for Soul Reaver 2, and the Tyrell fight sequence was originally planned for Soul Reaver 1. In Defiance, there were originally 5 more upgrades to Kain's Reaver. In the game, he only obtains the ones relating to conflict, energy, dimension, and time. The others, states, nature, death, and mind, were planned to be included. There's no evidence of this in the early versions of the game, so this could have just been brought up in the planning. Raziel would have also obtained a different fighting style from Kain, as there existed plans for Raziel to obtain a shield distinguishing him from the vampire even further. The Avernus Cathedral level is pretty short in the retail version, but was originally planned to be much larger. It had to be trimmed down due to time and budget constraints. There seems to have been a prototype version of the game where we travel forward to the Soul Reaver era of Nosgoth. We would have been able to see the Sanctuary of the Clans and Kain's throne, but with modern Defiance graphics and gameplay. Uma was originally planned to appear in Defiance as well, giving her character a larger backstory than she had received in Blood Omen 2. This would have showed her before she was turned into a vampire. In a cut sequence from the ending of the game, Kain was to complete Raziel's path, returning the Soul Reaver to Avernus for his younger self to find later. The last and most wanted of the cut content was the resurrection of Vorador. This chapter would have explained how Vorador had been resurrected, which still exists as a burning question in fans' eyes. He appears in Blood Omen 2 seemingly having been brought back to life, but unfortunately that explanation was cut from the final game. With Legacy of Kain Defiance, we've talked about the last main entry game in the series, but that doesn't mean it's the end of the story for this series. That was almost 18 years ago, and of course, it's not like 2 decades have passed without anything happening. Actually, quite a lot has happened. Like I said, in these 18 years, a lot has happened. With the Legacy of Kain fanbase being what it is, most of these games wouldn't officially see the light of day in the public's eyes. But the dedicated community has recovered a lot of information, making them common knowledge at this point. A lot of this information I'll be talking about comes from a NeoGAF post by Mama Robotnik, who chronicled all of the cancelled entries in the series in a post titled The 10 Cancelled Legacy of Kain Games. I put a link in the description in case you'd like a full rundown. With the release of Defiance, Eidos was not very confident in the series moving forward. It had underperformed in sales, and it wasn't as much of a critical success as the other games in the series had been. That being said, a sequel still entered development. This 6th game in the series was called Legacy of Kain: The Dark Prophecy. It was developed by Ritual Entertainment and was to be published by Eidos Interactive. Crystal Dynamics weren't totally absent on the project, as they were providing some assistance from the sidelines. Crystal Dynamics was moving on to focus on the Tomb Raider franchise at the time, which is why they didn't develop this entry in the first place. In similar timing, Amy Hennig left Crystal Dynamics for Naughty Dog, and left a farewell letter to the fans on her blog. According to Daniel Kabuko, the lead art designer on most of the Legacy of Kain games, most of the game would have taken place in the Hilden realm. The Hilden had carved out a place for themselves in the demon dimension when banished there centuries ago. We would have gotten to see a lot more of their people, hierarchies, societies, and even glyph cities. There is some evidence pointing to the fact that we would have had alternating protagonists in the same way Defiance had. We would have been shifting between a younger Kain post-Blood Omen 2 and our current version of Kain post-Defiance. There's also a large chance we would have seen a time shortly after the destruction of the Pillars. This could have been a great dynamic, playing as Kain's younger self shortly after he refused the sacrifice. The team had originally planned to put Raziel in the game, letting Kain summon him out of the Reaver at certain pivotal points, but this decision was vetoed by Crystal Dynamics as soon as they found out. I think this is an interesting choice, but ultimately a good one. It shows that Crystal Dynamics wanted Raziel's story to end in Defiance. They didn't want to drag it out longer than it needed to. The Dark Prophecy would have been a new chapter in Legacy of Kain, signifying new, interesting characters to explore. The Seer from Blood Omen 2 was also meant to return, being revealed as a vampire Hilden hybrid. Kain was also set to regain his form abilities, with his wolf transformation being able to be used by the player. The Elder God was also set to return, being the main adversary, whether from the background or in the forefront. I feel like there's a lot that could have been explored here, and it's far too late now to continue this story, almost 2 decades later. but seeing the hidden cities and seeing what happens between Kain and his great adversaries would have been fantastic. Alas, The Dark Prophecy was cancelled in 2004, the same year that it started development. Legacy of Kain: Dead Sun is by far the most known of the two cancelled Legacy of Kain sequels. In 2009, Square Enix bought out Eidos Interactive, thus buying the rights to all of their projects and games. At this time, Dead Sun was already in development, being worked on by Climax Games. Back then, Climax were best known for their works on Silent Hill: Shattered Memories and Silent Hill Origins. Most recently, they assisted Housemarque on the recent PS5 game Returnal. Square Enix didn't want to cancel the game. They did, however, have a few requirements. They first wanted to separate the game from the previous series, so it had to have a new main character with a story distant to the original series. They also required that the game have a multiplayer component, which we'll get to talking about in a bit. Climax was set to work on the single-player component alone, and Psyonix would work on the multiplayer component. Dead Sun had many different formats throughout its lifespan, at first being a small project that would possibly be a PS3 downloadable game. This then transitioned to a PS3 retail release, and eventually a PS4 launch title. The story was to be set in the distant future of Nosgoth. Mama Robotnik describes it as the same way that Doctor Who and Star Trek: The Next Generation took place in the same universe as their predecessors, but were not immediate continuations of previous events. A far-evolved race of blue-skinned vampires now exist in Nosgoth, called the Ceridin. One of the Ceridin, Kain, attacks a human of Nosgoth called Asher. Kain kills and feeds on Asher when Asher's human soul becomes bound to Kain's body. Asher's soul becomes trapped in Kain's body, and this is our protagonist. First off, looking at this footage, it reminds me a lot of Shadow of Mordor, the main characters being a soul trapped in another's body, using that other character's powers to assist in gameplay. It also has a similar looking combat style, combo moves, and fighting multiple enemies at once. I'm not saying any ideas were stolen here, I just think this is probably a case of multiple discovery. Asher would at some point return to his human village to see it burned and destroyed. This game was obviously going for a much darker tone here over Legacy of Kain's previous gothic fantasy. In line with this, Asher would attempt suicide when learning about the fate of his village. Eventually, he would explore Nosgoth, using his new abilities to seek vengeance on those who caused his circumstances. This would have tied to the fate of Nosgoth in some way, we're not really sure. The game was also to include a mystery of an old vampire child and revolved around the Elder God. The game was an open-world action-adventure game with upgradable abilities. Asher would be able to shift between the spectral and material realm, and the shifting mechanic was supposedly fundamental to the gameplay and very fluid. Dead Sun was never officially announced to the public. We only know about it because of the LoK fanbase and their mysterious Oracle Orb ways of finding information. All these ideas don't sound bad, and as you can tell, the game was pretty far into development. Apparently a ton of time had been put into the game, with artists and developers coming in on weekends to try and finish work. But Square Enix had decided that the game wasn't going to make the money it needed to, and decided to cancel the project in 2012. Since the game hadn't been announced yet, they'd put no money into marketing, and wanted to cut their losses early. The only issue with this is they decided to keep that information to themselves for a little while, and let development continue without informing the developers. This was obviously also a massive project, which Climax wasn't really ready for at the time. They had only worked on small, focused projects up until then, and didn't have the manpower or ability to work on something so large. I think this is the case of something just getting out of their hands. I can see how a game starting off as a small, downloadable title just to revive the series could turn into this large, open-world action-adventure game with multiple systems, exploration, and a huge storyline. Anonymous employees have stated that the reason for the slow development on the game was due to Square's poor direction and unrealistic demands. These unrealistic demands are probably what caused this small project to turn into a large one. A lot of this information came out a year after cancellation in 2013, with employees being covered under an NDA and not legally being allowed to talk about the project. I think Dead Sun could have been an interesting idea for the series moving forward, Something like this idea would need to happen in the future for the Legacy of Kain series to continue, as making a sequel to Defiance at this point isn't feasible. But what about that multiplayer component I talked about earlier? Well, Dead Sun got cancelled, but that actually kind of got released. Like I said before, Square Enix had required a multiplayer component to Dead Sun. This component was developed by Psyonix, the same studio that made Rocket League. Eventually, with the cancellation of Dead Sun, Nosgoth became its own thing. Nosgoth was a free-to-play arena-style multiplayer action game. Now, an arena-style multiplayer action game sounds like the exact thing that I would want from a Legacy of Kain entry, right? This was an odd decision and was obviously motivated to make money. Free-to-play games are good at this. Players will usually buy extra skins or weapons or whatever things you throw at them, especially because they know that they didn't pay anything for the game in the first place. In 2019, free-to-play games generated a total of $87.1 billion worldwide. This turn was obviously a strange one, but it made sense when looked at through the lens of Square Enix. Nosgoth took place after the events of Soul Reaver, with Kain having left Nosgoth in the Chronoplast to journey back in time. A power vacuum was in place, causing the humans to rise up and rebel more than ever. The original concept was to have lore develop as the game progressed. You could ally with humans or vampires and directly impact the lore of the game moving forward. This was a huge promise, but it was a smart decision. Lore is mostly the thing that we're here for, so promising fans the ability to change the outcome of the story moving forward would theoretically bring the attention of LoK diehards. I don't think this component ever made it into the game, as Nosgoth never made it out of beta. The game launched its alpha with plenty of bugs and performance issues, but Square Enix wanted this game to make money. It had to because they were probably looking to make back the money they lost on Dead Sun with this title. Even with these issues, the game trudged on, and Psyonix released multiple new maps and added another game mode. In Nosgoth, you could play Deathmatch and Flashpoint. Deathmatch was exactly what it sounds like, and Flashpoint was basically King of the Hill, fighting for control of one objective. Teams were split into vampires and humans, with the vampires being able to fly and climb buildings quickly, while the humans were grounded and used an assortment of weapons. Each team had a variety of classes to choose from, the vampires having the Reaver, Tyrant, Sentinel, Deceiver, and Summoner, and the humans having the Hunter, Alchemist, Scout, Prophet, and Vanguard. Each had their own distinct playstyle, with a variety of different weapons or abilities to choose from. I did actually play Nosgoth when it was in its open beta, albeit my total playtime was only 52 minutes, so I didn't experience much of what it had to offer, if there was anything there at all. Now, I know when talking about this game, I've given Square Enix the benefit of the doubt. That doesn't mean that I don't think it was a stupid direction to take the series. Obviously, Legacy of Kain is a story-based cinematic experience. Some of the best moments of the series are just two characters talking, so why make a game where that's never even allowed to happen? This game surely wasn't for the Legacy of Kain fanbase, and I'm sure it would have suited Square Enix better if they just removed the branding from the game entirely. Alas, the open beta began in January 2015, and the Nosgoth servers were officially shut down on June 14th, 2016, adding Nosgoth into the Hall of Failures in the Legacy of Kain series. You know, what is it about this series that drives you to take on a project that's so vast and comprehensive?
I think it's just the whole package, the presentation, the characters. It's just so many things, the music. I mean, it's all just kind of works. I don't know if there are, obviously there are things which we don't like about the games, that like, oh, this could be so much better if they've done this and that. I could talk about Defiance all day. Regarding that, I guess it's the writing and the characters which are in the center of this.
It's one of the things where they obviously laid the groundwork of such an engrossing mythology and a detailed world that you can sort of really believe it and be. I mean, you do have some of the finest characterization and voice acting. Certainly, that there was at the time. There was nothing like it. Yeah, just atmosphere is top notch, and you just You fall in love with the world.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
For me, it was really the storytelling drew me in. So I, as I mentioned earlier, the first of the games that I played was Soul Reaver, and then I went back and played Blood Omen. None of the others had been released yet. And so Soul Reaver felt like a very solid world with a lot of depth to it. And being able to go back and play Blood Omen made me feel even more so like this is a world with enormous depth to it. The quality of the storytelling, again, that was so rare in that era. It's become, it had a big influence. So now having real voice actors and even film actors appear in a game is not anything unusual. But it made such a difference at the time, and so that attachment lasted for a while.
In terms of the series itself, on the whole, would be just the story. It is literally, I've played numerous games like over the years. I'm not a youngster, so I've been playing a game a long time, and it is one of the highest quality storyline driven games I've ever actually played. Each individual game had its own like things that would grab people from their own perspectives. They all brought something new to the table, really.
I think there's a common thread here, and that's story. Legacy of Kain has truly one of the greatest stories in video games. I think its dialogue is still rivaled today in its complexity and depth. Its ability to develop characters over time and completely turn your perception of those characters on its head, while making you look completely different at the world that it's built for you. The world building itself is second to none. Crystal Dynamics and Silicon Knights created a world that feels full of life. It feels lived in, like there are actual things to be learned, like the history of the world is real and needs to be uncovered. It's full of mystery and intrigue, and with each subsequent entry you're learning more, but you're also coming up with new questions that you've yet to find the answers to. There's a reason I didn't go too in-depth with the story on Soul Reaver. That's because good writing and good stories change the way that you look at them. Legacy of Kain is one of those stories. But what about the future? It must seem pretty grim from my analysis and explanation. Ending on the failures of the series must make it seem like Kain and Raziel are doomed to never return. And as I wrote this script, Soul Reaver was taken off of Steam to fix its broken PC port, and Blood Omen was put on GOG for the first time ever. That's gotta mean something, right? When I started this video, I figured I'd focus mainly on the past. But seeing the dedication and work of this fan base has shown me that no matter if a Legacy of Kain game never comes out again, the Legacy of Kain will never die. It will always live and breathe through its fans. If there's one thing I want this video to do, it's to stand as a testament to how much love this community has for these games. It should show that there's still people waiting out there. And seeing all this work that these people have put in and talking with them about this series, I thank them for the first bitter taste of that terrible illusion. Hope. Holy shit, if you made it to the end of this video, I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching this whole insanely large and long project. It really means a lot that people want to watch my videos, and I put so much time and work into them that I can't thank you enough, seriously. I love Legacy of Kain, and I've been wanting to make this video for a while, and I also recently just launched my Patreon, so if you'd like to support me, I'd first urge you to reconsider, but I will be putting the full interviews I did with Baz, Reyna, Ben, and Kevin up over there, so you can see the entire things. It also just works as a great way to support the content I make. I'd eventually like to do this full time, and just that little bit helps towards that goal. I also want to thank the whole LoK community. They were so helpful in the making of this video. Thanks for letting me bug you with my questions and concerns, and I thank everyone that's done so much research and work so that I didn't have to. Again, thank you everyone that watched this video, and if you liked it, give it a like and subscribe to my channel because I'll definitely be making more content like this in the future. Bye, Dad.